Hello and welcome back to the Water. My name is Beast. Today I'm back with Hello Lady. I really ended it at a mean place last time, considering the co-host that came in between. But hey, now we're back, and I have booze. Then again, considering that I had this yesterday already, I would have had booze either way. So there's that. Also, the fact that actually both of my co-hosts had free time on Thursday, so technically they could have probably made time today instead. Thinking about it, I did not handle this well, didn't I? Oh well, let's just go ahead. It was green as far as she could see. She didn't have the slightest idea where she was. She was in a forest alongside Narita just moments ago. She couldn't begin to understand how she'd ended up in a place like this. Blue sky and the green sea stretching out into the horizon. A gentle wind was caressing her cheeks. The smell of grass and dirt tickled her nose. Beige, silky hair fluttered in the wind. The fields were waving like a calm sea. Far off in the distance, far beyond the horizon, there was a straight tower reaching directly into the sky. It was made of gold. Tip was above even the clouds, and she couldn't see it even if she tried. She realized how puny she was. This wide world made her aware of her insignificant size. No matter how harsh and cruel one's life was, it was fleeting before this vast field of green. The vacuum-like silence pierced her like a knife. The next moment she realized that there was a silhouette before her. She didn't know where it had come from, but it was notably small. It had no eyes or nose, as though its head was covered in cloth. It was dark and hazy all throughout, and its outline occasionally shook as if attacked by a white noise. It seemed like a jester, slightly shivered to left and right like a clockwork machine. She felt like she spoke about something very important before coming here, but she couldn't remember the details. Her heart was full of anxiousness, as if she was about to enter a place she couldn't come back from. Where did you want to go? What desire did you want to fulfill?
守りたかったのです。そうあるべきだと教えられてきたのです。その義務があった。私には力があった。力には義務が伴う。
Someone watched Spider-Man. Jokes.
家族、友人、故郷の土地、同胞たち、みんな守ってあげなければ。だって小さくて弱いから。そしてあなたは守った。いいえ、私では守れない。世界に及ばない。目を離すと消えてしまう。懐かしい土地だって。どうすればいい？みんな弱い。たやすく壊れてしまう。どうして弱いままでいられるの？私には理解できない。どこへ行きたい？
Jester sang.
守りたい。もっともっともっと。今度は完璧に。見逃さず、歌詞もなく、たった一人も殺すことなく。
Is it gonna be a weird instance of her actually controlling the fucking onslaught?
お願い。私に守らせて。その尊い願いなら、きっと頂へ届くだろう。
She was embraced by a feather-like warmth. Embraced by the jester's many hands that shone green, she drowned in a peace she hadn't experienced since she was born. She felt as though she'd returned to the womb, where there was no fear of grief or grief.
今こそ新たな世界の種を。帰らせよう。
In the cold yet bright fields, she voiced a prayer. Back to fucking chaos. I left Mitri where she was and reflexively went at Mita's back. My instincts could smell death, and they were telling me that I would have died if I stayed there. Mitri Kabutoyama, the entity that was her until just a few moments ago, majestically stood up. That alone covered my body in chills of fear. It was more repulsive than even death, yet a part of me actually found it enticing, making me feel intoxicated and to let it take me. Turned its head so awkwardly, it guessed that it had forgotten how to use its body. Oh, you know what it was called. It had been with us since the ancient times. It's a single concept given different names in many languages all over the world. As I ran, I initiated the boost code. It was boost code, not boot code. Couldn't miss the one opportunity. The situation was growing worse by the moment. If I didn't make use of this moment, I would lose all means of resisting it. As the effects of the bombardment were still lingering around, I rushed forward and broke through the white dust blocking my vision. Knowing that I was asking for the same miracle to happen twice. Knowing that asking for the same miracle to happen twice was too much, I rushed as fast as I could, fixated solely on this task.
Narita!
I ignored even Taigi's words, and right before I was 5 meters of it, within 5 meters of it, my body jumped to the in the opposite direction. I was running away again. My instincts were thoroughly against coming any closer. Taigi was right. Coming any closer to her would have meant my death.
Narita-sama, どうなさったの？そばにいらして。来られないのでしたら、私から参りましょうか？
She suddenly looks 80. Jesus. I spoke with Mitori's voice, but I felt like I was standing in front of a hungry beast. Mind suppression by Hamlet's 12. Shortening the boost code made it lose precision, but I successfully wrote the code for stopping into her brain. Despite that, she was still coming closer. The air around her decayed as she came closer, walking with steps like she was at a ball, completely ignoring her injuries. She wasn't stopping at all.
さあ、ダンスでも踊りましょう。何も心配はいりませんのよ。
サンゴ、ミトリを止めろ。
Was there pain in Taigi's face, or was it just seeing things? Next moment, he was back to normal. No, he looked far more serious than normal.
承知しました。
Like a fired arrow, the maid called number 3 dashed and becoming a living gale. What the fuck was that about? That was odd. The speed no normal human could easily follow. Number 3 bathed in full auto fire from its rifle, adding to the destruction of the anti-ground missiles while still raining down from the gunship. In response, it merely swung its fan in a highly refined manner, cutting through everything as high as dozens of meters. As though harvested by a giant invisible sword, the trees in that height collapsed all at once. The AA missiles were cut down in midair at the rain of 7.25mm rifle bullets that could easily break concrete blocks were deflected by an invisible wall. Overpowering the immense gunfire and ordnance, it continued to abuse its power. It survived the burning barrage like it was passing summer rain, and cracked an ecstatic smile.
さあ、いらっしゃい。
Number 3 evaded an invisible blade by jumping. It calmly swung its fan in return, and in midair, the maid would have no way of escaping it. Was stopped by 2 bullets from my Glock, fired at her shoulder and leg, as I only wished to stop her, not kill her. They both hit her mark, making it stumble for the first time. This proved that her defense wasn't absolute. This could be seen as a sign of hope. Regardless, I was focused on stopping her first. I'd stop her, then bring her back once again. For that, I had to stop this monster as well as protect it from Taigi. I'd encouraged this entity once and knew that I would likely see it again. I had already prepared for trouble this extreme. I continued firing, quickly releasing a volley of 6 bullets, mostly as feints, or to keep her in place. 4 of them were deflected, while the other 2 only grazed her. It shifted its attention to me, but it wasn't faltering one bit. A wound on the side, shoulder and leg would be enough to make most people faint, but she seemed unaffected. Had she cut her senses using her halo, or did she just not care about pain?
いずれにせよ、半端なことでは止められそうにないな。
そんなに暴れてはいけませんわよ。もっと礼儀正しくしなければ。
それは彼に言うべきだ。
I'd realized something was wrong and turned around to see the black maid make his next move. Hold on, talking is hard. Something is using up all my fucking shit again. Jesus Christ, what is happening? Oh, there is an annoyance. The baseball-sized metal canister that had rolled next to the woman's feet exploded, releasing intense light and sound. It was a stun grenade.
こったかしいことを。
I quickly lowered my face and covered my ears to avoid the intense light and sound. Looked up and saw it covering its ears with a somewhat angry expression, if you ignored the grin. In that range, a stun grenade wouldn't make any human lose their consciousness for a good 10 seconds, and this was all it did to her.
成田、あれはオンスロート。ハローの暴走。
Staying some distance away, Taigi said that with an intense expression. Though I'd taken measures against it, the stun grenade still affected my hearing, but not enough to make me deaf.
通常、ハローは現実と異なる別のレイヤーで働く力だ。だが、オンスロート化したハローは現実を侵食する。
Hello? Why is my
こうなればどうしよ
everything
うもない。
struggling this hard today?
成田、せめて彼女が罪を犯してしまう前に止めてやってくれ。
Sincere, honest request that I would deny.
絶望にはまだ早い。それは前例尽くして及ばなかった時に取っておくものだ。オンスロートから回復した HMI はいない。希望に取りつかれて対局を見誤るな。一度は正気に戻せた。もう一度試してみる価値はある。
It raised the right hand as if to shoo away a bug. An attack, another, third one. Each of them tore the forest apart. The fact that the maid was evading them all was miraculous. It wouldn't last long though. Mitori just needed to flick her wrist once or twice to finally outpace the maid's dodging and cut that tiny frame apart like a piece of cloth. Strangely enough, there was pain in my chest. It was a feeling that didn't suit this merciless avenger at all. Used the distraction the maid was risking it all to create to make my next move. I began running straight towards Mitori. Hamlet 12 imprinted not words but orders to the brain. No matter what state Mitori was in, as long as her body moved by orders from the brain, she couldn't avoid it completely. However, it hadn't reached her as of now. It hadn't reached her as she was now. Why? Was it already impossible hitting her back? Well, she blocked it like she was blocking bullets. What I did know was that I couldn't reach her from where I was. But it wasn't enough.
ならば、行くしかあるまい。
I crossed the fatal distance of 5 meters and went beyond it, fully aware that I would have no hope against her if she would do this. Against anything she would do in this range, I unhesitantly approached her. The entire world was rewritten. I saw what I hadn't seen before. There was lightning like strands of light extending from the empty space and reaching for the limbs like the strings of a marionette. This was how the world created by Mitori Kabutayama's Halo. This was the world created by Mitori Kabutayama's Halo, Tempest 7. Physical area type halos repainted reality with their own world. Halos were limited by the laws of physics, but within the personal areas of physical area types, the halos were equal to law, so theoretically, nothing was impossible within them. In a way, the personal area was the manifestation of the HMI's inner world, and that alone made it impossible to adjust even for them, or they would also be affected by the area's rules. Mitori's kingdom was an area of flawless clockwork where everything was under control. In here, all that was human, from the slightest of their movements to the actions of the involuntary muscles and hearts, would move as she willed them. It was a halo that controlled the human body. She could easily stop the heart, remove sense of pain, or move an immobile body like a marionette. My hands still moved, and so did my legs, while my heart and lungs and other vital organs were still working. Animals tried to survive by instinct, so even in Mitori's area, involuntary muscles and other basic bodily activity must have been preserved subconsciously. Under normal circumstances, entering Mitori's area only made me feel slightly off. However, now that my body was placed under complete control of its automatic functions such as temperature and heartbeat management, as well as the reflexes I'd honed, no longer worked properly. As proven by the most skillful of many fields, techniques of the highest level were faster than consciousness. I was now detached from the state that could only be reached thanks to the countless hours of training I'd done, as well as the experience I'd piled up, turning my body into a mere subordinate of consciousness. Technique was a product of harmony between mind and body. The situation was akin to having my entire body be replaced by a mannequin's. My limbs could move, couldn't fight properly, couldn't even evade properly and survive its attacks long enough to make it closer. So I had no choice but to act from here. So I hurried to end this, my right arm. As I hurried to end this, my right arm got in my way. As though it had become a separate creature, it went against me, reaching into my holster and taking out the Glock 17 before putting it against my temple without any hesitation. I avoided the suicide bullet by forcefully twisting my neck and using my still free left hand to beat the gun out of my right hand. This scene must have looked quite absurd to any onlooker. Despite the comedy, this was actually one of the most dangerous situations that I'd ever been in. This was Mitori's Halo. Could control not just her own, but others' bodies as well. I had to regain control over my right arm. This battle would be hopeless if I didn't. The right arm then tried to strangle me. I caught it with my left before I'd reached my neck. Knew this would create a fatal opening, but I didn't have the luxury of a better choice. As I stood in place, I felt the killing intent gather all around me. It was impossible to grasp as a mist. It was as impossible to grasp as mist and as sharp as a drill. I actually recognized it. These were Mitori's spindles that I'd experienced in choreography. The invisible spears assumed the shape. I tried to dodge, but I wasn't fast enough. My limbs were far duller than they would be under normal circumstances after all. I would be hit. I felt it coming despite no pain or impact. However, this time it didn't tear me. It was far worse. My body went crazy. Hands, legs, joints, muscles, nerves, heart. The new orders from the outside made my body move like it was out of control. The new threads of light wrapped around me were the true form of the spindles I'd just been hit with. Although these didn't come from the empty space, but Mitori's own body. These countless threads was Mitori Kabutayama's personal area. They were the strings that controlled humankind like marionettes. The spindles were basically just these threads rolled into tough bunches and fired into the distance. During choreography, she'd most likely hit me with an order for apoptosis. I hadn't been cut. This made the damaged area undergo rapid necrosis, meaning I'd essentially been cut by a function of my own body. Now made sense why walls and clothes remained unharmed. She probably hadn't complete control of my body back then because I was too far. Physical type area type halos were generally close ranged. She could roll up, connect, or expand her personal area like threads to surpass the limits of range. That limited her to only simple orders. She had to be close to do more. And now we were extremely close. As I was a human-like construct, she could bend me to her will. My limbs were not my own. I couldn't move or speak. I was basically bound. This made me unable to use my halo either. I'd like a fly caught in a spider's web.
そろそろおしまいの時間ですの?
Feminine monster sneered. The expression didn't suit her at all. And I would let it stay. There. Forced my tongue and lips to create words.
いいえ、やはりおしまいですわ。ご安心ください。あとは私が守って差し上げます。
Couldn't breathe. My vision was drowning in white. He had stopped my heart. The beats were no more. My blood flow slowed down. My brain wasn't getting enough oxygen. Naturally, that put an end to my consciousness. No. Not yet. He couldn't fall yet. Narita still hadn't done what he had to do. What he had to. I had to fulfill my oath and keep the promise I'd made to Mitori. Made up for the stopped blood flow with other energy. Looked for an alternative to my broken limbs. Couldn't let myself give in to the despair as long as I was alive. The anger and hatred within my body couldn't be stopped by the loss of a mere heart or two. Did he just like use his halo on himself, basically? I opened my eyes to see a dark, starless sky. It was shockingly clear, though there was no atmosphere. But there wasn't a single bit of light. It wasn't pure darkness, however. Far from the distance, there was a shining golden tower so tall I couldn't see the top. Oh, is he fucking triggering his own onslaught syndrome? I was just mentioning last part. How the fuck would his onslaught syndrome work? Sick. Soon realized that I was on the surface. Oh hey, that's the main menu now. It was all covered in reddish burned sand. There wasn't a single plant as far as the eye could see, or any other signs of life. No animals, insects, or even microbes. This land was completely barren and void. The sides of this vacuum made me feel like I was on the surface of the moon, and it made my ears hurt. I saw a silhouette. There was one person in this wasteland. A puppet-like entity vibrating to the sides. There was a clockwork music box nearby that Jester danced along with the sounds. Jester sang. It seemed human, but I instantly understood that it was too unnatural to be that. It was like a storm confined into the shape of human, something that was assuming the appearance by force.
何者だ?
僕は影だ。最初からいて、最後までいる。
Suddenly I had an epiphany. Though there were no reasons to think it, I realized that this was the realm within Mitori. It was difficult for halos to influence others directly. Controlling someone else's body was such a hard task that in most cases they used indirect channels such as heat or pressure. Even an 12-tier HMI like Mitori couldn't ignore this rule. Her halo was still nothing more than complete control of herself. However, she was cheating. She bypassed this halo's law by using the threads of her area to connect others to her and essentially make them part of herself. It was only natural that she could see her inner area. That I could see her inner area. Now that she had taken control of me, I was not only Shindiri Narita, but also Mitori Kabutoyama, Kenki. This contradictory state created this phenomenon.
お前は何だ?
道化に 名を尋ねるなど無粋なこと。
The jester danced.
そうか。お前は。
そうとも、僕は
最初の1。我々の根源か。
This starting to sound more and more like fucking like it could be related to Utabarumono. Like I was unaware that Witzel Nemetia was just here.
「君の尊い願いは頂に届くだろうか。
Sneering jester jumped around, exhibiting no good or
ど
evil.
こへ行きたい？
Jester's song made me feel oddly peaceful. Staying here with it would truly be more tranquil than anything. My limbs were as heavy as lead. It felt as though they'd been cut off, and even standing was a challenge. I could just lie down here and sleep while waiting for the morning that would never come. The serenity I would feel would be unmatched. I wouldn't have to cry about the past I'd lost, or be burned by the hatred within. This desolate wasteland was a reflection of my own heart as well. For the past 7 years, I'd embraced the madness of revenge and headed forward without even looking back. It was a path that I could stop walking at any moment. Yet I walked it, despite how taxing it was on me. There were tragedies everywhere. Even if you occasionally extended a helping hand, the world continued to spawn tears, betrayal, and failure. It was an endless and exhaustible rondo of despair. People were nothing but jesters, dancing on a stage until the morning that would never come due to the whims of the bored lord above.
選ぶ道はすでに決まっている。
The jester stopped dancing. It looked at me with curiosity. I had to go to it. My legs were too decayed to move properly. As I dragged them, they left behind rotten flesh. I reached forward with my right hand. That alone required all my strength. Even so, I had to keep going.
どうして行くの？
私が成田真理だからだ。
The jester looked at the hand, reaching for it with curiosity. 1 millimeter, then another. Bearing the pain torturing my heart, I pathetically struggled to go forward to the entity that was looking at me curiously. Shinri Narita had sworn revenge. I decided on my own and was ready for any pain and grief. Why would I regret going as far as I could? My right hand, its fingers touched it.
され、どけ。私は行くべきところへ行こう。
I crushed the featureless face and shook it off. Nearly dead, I realized that my eyes were closed. I felt the gaze, not an enemy's gaze though, it came from within. Yes, I finally realized the imperfection that had been there from the start would be corrected. I felt a connection of some sort. Finally, I felt my heartbeat return. Blood rushed through my veins, and I felt heat. Slowly opened my eyes, exposing myself to the strong reality of the force around me. Twisting pain rushed through my hands and legs, but I could move them. There was some conflict between the feeling of bodily control within Mitori's personal area, but the spindle that had rid me of control had been undone.
あらあら、一体どうやって？
The one most surprised about this was that thing. The spears, spindles of a personal area couldn't even be touched. So there was no reason for Shinri Narita to be able to shake it off. It had taken a step back, not by conscious choice. The immortal monster had lost herself because of this incomprehensible situation. I stuck out my right hand and captured its left. I was so wasted away that I couldn't speak a single decent phrase. My body was so fatigued that I couldn't speak for dozens of seconds, even after restoring my body with the breathing of Gibbed. Yet I still did what I had to. Our hands touched for only a moment. Didn't have a proper reason for doing this. I was just strangely certain that this was what I had to do. Mitori swung my hand away and jumped back as far as she could. The monster was retreating, abandoning all pretense and pride. Fan was swung, the invisible threads overflowed like a river of tears. Like Taigi said, the threads from her personal area that could alter reality transitioned into semi-physical phenomena, giving them an edge sharper than that of the finest of blades. The forest went out of alignment. Countless threads tore apart reality. The trees were cut down to the same level and began collapsing at the same time. The surface below was cut as well. Crevices opened up in every cardinal direction, creating the detailed cubes that quickly crumbled. If I had recovered in time and jumped backwards, the same would have surely happened to me. It was a localized storm that sliced up all it touched. Mitri was no longer at its heart. She escaped in just a moment, and I no longer had the strength to chase after her. Taigi watched as part of the forest collapsed with eyes like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. He'd seen records of onslaught syndrome cases. What he'd known was no match for reality. He realized that he wasn't severe enough on this.
Narita! Mitori!
The walls of thick dust blocked his sight and he couldn't see whether Narita was alive. Mitri was likely already gone. If Mitri wanted to kill him, she would have done it already, so the fact that he was alive meant that she had already escaped. He knew full well that Narita would never back down and that there was no way to save Mitri. Had he prayed that the obstinate blockhead would have a change of heart, or had he dreamed of an impossible miracle? People could never catch up to the world. Fate always had cruel betrayals in store for them. He knew that better than anyone, so why didn't he take care of the situation himself right away? His own vague thoughts made him laugh. How could he say that when he wasn't able to go anywhere? There was no hate, that would just be a reversal of the hope. There was no bloodlust, that would just be a fruit of rage. Taigi Mikoto was unfamiliar with both of those things. He had no hopes or desires. It all vanished on that day long ago. Taigi sighed in a disinterested manner, turning back to himself, before reaching for the earphone in his ear to report the situation. But then he froze. Taigi silently took off the earphone and held it between two fingers, for throwing it as far away from his ear as possible. The sound of a gun roared out. The earphone was shot. Hold on, is it like some... Did he like fucking evolve and it's no longer requires words or some bullshit?
無事とはね。人間離れしているのは知っていたけど、そこまでデタラメとは思わなかった。掴んで振りほどいた。君の冗談は昔から面白くないんだよ。
There was a Glock 17 aimed at him from behind. The one holding it was, of course, Narita. His breathing was ragged. The battle against Mitri must have been taxing. Even a toddler had a chance against him now. Faced with this golden opportunity, Taigi just raised his hands in resignation. Number 3, heavily wounded and dragging a leg behind her, appeared from between the trees. The rifle in those arms had been empty for a long time, yet the maid was as ready for battle as a starved lynx.
やめてくれないか。あと、君も外してくれ。
Taigi tapped his ear, making the maid obey like a robot and removed the earphone. Having been damaged, and with its arsenal exhausted, the gunship had retreated too, meaning that no one but those present would hear the conversations here.
それほど猶予はないよ。コーディリアを使ってしまったからね。君たちがここにいるのを時の先生も気づいたろ。手間をかけるつもりはない。ミトリを追わなければならないからな。君はまだ彼女を救うつもりなのかい？可能性がある限り約束は守る。すべての道が断たれたとしても、それでも私は彼女を救う。
You know, in a way, like, since we've talked about like your D&D classes, I feel like in a way, just because of the way he keeps fucking surviving, he should at least have like the fighter indomitable, because that's gotta be some kind of like fucking death save advantage that keeps him fucking getting up.
それは彼女の肉体を、それとも魂を。
No response, just a brief, heavy breathing.
聞きたいことがある。帝大義。
Tiger remembered the distant past. He spent a minute thinking about how to respond to his sincere, passionate words.
いいとも。僕の知っている限りのことを教えよう。
Mitri Kabutoyama was a born HMI. She could see the structure of the human body before she first opened her eyes. She eventually realized that this was a privilege that she alone had. People of olden days revered untouchable natural might as divine. It was in human nature to fear and respect what was beyond comprehension. Mitri could see them all, but she barely considered any of them. People were machines made of flesh. She could see even the pulses involved in their movements. As a noble being who'd been granted powers from above, she had a duty to protect the weak, but there was no reason to think much about them. All that mattered were the numbers. If her given role was to make as many of her people survive, then she just had to lower the numbers of those who died. As a member of the Kabutoyama family, she'd always made choices that minimized the number of those who'd fallen from under her wing. To her, it was much like checking the products for problems and getting rid of those she found defective. And it didn't make her feel anything close to regret. It was a perfect world that didn't allow for the existence of something as ambiguous as the heart. She hadn't changed even after she was found by Kurofune. She'd arrived at the academy and met other HMIs, but none of them were all that different from the rest. All of them were complete. They were all pitiful people who couldn't control themselves and had powers that were too much for them. She'd been evaluated as an étoile. She took it as if it was only to be expected. Stars were stars no matter where they went, after all. That was when Sako Tanashi asked her to join the crowns.
私に軍門に下れと、そうおっしゃるのね。
Mitri considered the offer she'd just been given. School was over for the day. She'd been resting her chin in her hand within the empty classroom as Sako approached her. No one had been brave enough to do something about this since Mitri transferred.
そうではなくて、自分の義務を果たさねばならない、と言っているのです。兜山さん。
Mitri snickered. She was a star, yet this person was treating her like an equal. How blatantly imperfect of her.
あなたに、私を使う資格がありますの？何が言いたいのかしら？支配するべきものが支配する。それこそがノーブル。私にとって、あなたはあまたの者たちと同じでしかないと。
Mitri did agree on the very idea of joining the crowns. The garden, lacking maintenance, would quickly fall to ruin. Many people were so weak that it would break without any protection. Someone had to lead the over 100 HMIs in the academy. It was only natural that it would be the greatest of the crowns. However, Mitri didn't know if this woman, Sako Tanashi, was worthy. It wasn't a matter of lineage or social standing, or a leader only had to have a will and the power. And in her eyes, every single person that wasn't her was imperfect.
もっとわかりやすく申しましょうか。私を従えたいのなら、力ずくでなさい。
Sako ended up not accepting the challenge. As Sako left, Mitri was looking down at her as she once again realized that the woman wasn't worthy any more than the others. Sako didn't know what to do in response to the challenge. She had her hands full fighting the lack of experience within her. Mitri could understand her as she was now, but back then she couldn't even consider that much, making her the true inexperienced person. The next day, To Mitri, the world was something to protect. She controlled and the peace and people received her protection. A value system split beautifully in two. Some would call it discrimination, but in Mitri's eyes it was just division of roles. After all, rule in the hands of the unworthy was a true tragedy for the masses. Looking down at the inner garden through the window of a third-floor cluster, Mitri smirked and closed her fan. Eru, who was in the inner garden, suddenly charged towards the pale wall of the school building in speeds that greatly surpassed her physical ability. Sakura raised her voice upon noticing, but she was too late. Before Eru crashed, Sorako Katsuragi, another crown, exerted herself to stop her. Sorako didn't move right away. The great force of the impact left her somewhat incapacitated. Though if she hadn't gotten involved, Eru would have been severely injured, if not dead. Harming one's people out of mischief was a lowly act, but if necessary, she had no problem doing it. She had to protect the garden as a whole, after all, not every separate plant. Sakura raised her head and her eyes met Mitori's. Oh, what a joy. She was so mad. She must have realized who was responsible for this comedy. Sakura could handle insults to herself, but harm done to her friends filled her with indignation. This adorable way of being made Mitori snicker once again. Contrary to her expectation, upon coming back to the door, Mitori was confronted by Sorako. The girl had nothing special to her besides her constant cheerful smile, but now her eyebrows were furrowed. Mitori was honestly disappointed that she wasn't the person she'd hoped for. Sorako's words were suddenly cut short. Mitori didn't intend to waste any time on her nonsense. Instead, she put on a display of power that even the densest could understand. Sorako was unable to move even a single finger on her own anymore, and Mitori only tilted her head and put on a cold smile. She then thought about how to play with her, but then... Sakura Tanashi returned from the academy and now stood in the living room. Edo Takazaki was right next to her like a shadow. Sakura took a deep breath before looking straight at Mitori. My god, Mitori used to be a bitch. Then there made a smile appear on her face, as sharp as the crescent moon. All the imperfect people surrounding her were making her feel truly bored. Sakura Tanashi was the insignia of the academy, and as the chosen peak of the HMI, she had to be the first worthy prey Mitori had ever met. She felt excited like never before, and it almost made her lick her lips, but then a strange thought went through her like lightning. I won't win this, will I? Like a strange thought went through her head. I fucked up! Just when had that happened? The image in the mind was as faint as light leaking through the leaves. She couldn't even tell whether it was real or an illusion born from her mind. Mitori opened her eyes to find herself in a dark corner of a back alley somewhere in town. How was she here? She had only fragments of the memories of the events that led her here. There was no consistency, like in film that had been randomly cut up. An entire day or two had passed since she'd escaped that forest. Couldn't have been 3. That was the best guess she could make. During all this time, her consciousness was randomly appearing on the surface like bubbles on water, only to sink again. Even now, she'd felt like the darkness could take her if she wasn't careful. Her body wanted rest, but she was afraid to even sleep. Every time she lost consciousness, she could feel bits of herself leaving her like water leaking through a hole in the container. Mitri Kaptoyama. That was a fact. That was a fact of her life. She wasn't all that confident even in that anymore. She no longer had a place to go to. That truth alone was deeply imprinted in her mind. She couldn't go back to the academy or seek salvation from anyone. What's that again? No, memories were still there. Each of them were easy to find if she looked for them, but she was now failing to grasp the meaning behind them. It was a primal transformation that was hard to put into words. She was forced to realize that all those events she treasured were actually worthless. Worthless memories were nothing but information. They weren't worth remembering, and they would sink to the bottom and be buried forever. The pain in her heart was only matched by the burning on her body. Whenever conscience surfaced, she was attacked by waves of thirst that seemed to be burning each and every one of her nerves. She clawed at the asphalt below her hands, not holding back one bit. The unbearable pain caused the unbearable pain lowered the thirst just a bit and relaxed her. She writhed around, but the torturous feeling didn't seem to go away, even if she returned to her senses and reached something even deeper than her body. She had no choice but to breathe raggedly and wait for it to pass. After all, the only way to escape this hunger was to slake it. She occasionally felt people pass by, and every time she heard something within her let out a low whisper. It just became ... And what a terrifyingly and sweet whisper. After all, she was a kind promise to be just that. A wish would just come true. It would come true if she just indulged in her urges. A wish to protect. The body was being tortured by an unquenchable thirst. How was she resisting it? Would make her wish come true. Something within her was screaming, telling her that even death was a better alternative to that. The words were the remains of Mitri. They made a faint pain run through her heart. She embraced it like a sweet nectar and forced herself to stop. It was only a matter of time. She was resisting it now, but tomorrow or later the urges that couldn't go away would overwhelm her. The result of this battle was clear before it began. Before it happened, she had to what? Her consciousness lapsed again. At some point, the spasms of pain abated. She had been unconscious for several minutes, if not hours. Just what was she doing during these times she couldn't remember? Was she just sleeping like a corpse? Or was it already too late and all her struggling was completely meaningless? She saw dreams as though asleep. An endless empty field of grass and a golden tower. Whenever she was here, she would forget her hunger, making her want to just stay here. She wanted that from the bottom of her heart, but something within was resisting it. She was wasting away more and more. People could get used to pain, but they couldn't bear peace. She knew that she would be safe if she just reached out, but resisting it was too much. She knew that she would finally break tonight. Before she knew it, it was night. She wanted to give in to the dead light of the moon, but the heat coming from within raged within her so hard that it felt like it could tear her apart. Her sigh was heated and stuck to her throat like a beast. She was hungry and thirsty beyond compare. She raised her body, which was dry as a mummy. She didn't know why she had run into a back alley. Inside, she saw a woman walking by, and the side of her back made Mitri lick her lips. Become ...
そうよ。守ってあげないと。
As though dancing, she began chasing the woman only to stop soon after. She had noticed the silhouette that had entered the back alley. seemed to Mitri that it was trying to stand in her way. That made her laugh. There was a limit to how unaware of their position one could be. There's no problem to her though. Everyone was dear to her after all, obstacle or not. Oh, what a beautiful moon and wonderful night. Perfect for starting a new me.
らしくねえ顔してんじゃねえよ。
The silhouette standing in the way voiced a lament. After getting a good look at it, Mitri slightly furrowed her brow.
玉尾さん。
ああ、俺だ。んだよ。タヌキにでも化かされたような面しやがって。
The person was none other than Tamawaka Hito. The eyes of the girl Mitri knew well were reflecting the town's lights like a pair of sad gems. The face of her friend Mitri hadn't seen in a long time made her smile like a blooming flower.
どうしてこんなところへ？ああ、なるほど。晩作尽きた時の先生がとうとうクラウンを動かしたと。
Mitri nodded to herself while the girl scoffed. While standing tall in Mitri's way, she spoke in a voice full of displeasure.
んなわけあるか。時の先生やクソ理事長はよ、この一件、俺たち学生には是が非でも知られたくないらしいぜ。いいことを教えてやろうか、ミトリ。てめえは家庭の事情で突然呼び戻されてスクールを辞めたんだとよ。
あら、そんな事情が？すると、私、どうしてこんな場所にいるのかしら？
さあな。てめえのことなんざ俺の知ったこっちゃねえ。それよりもだ。さっき何しようとしてやがった？
The air seemed to grow stiff, despite the sharp, lethal murderous intent directed at her. Mitri smiled as if it was nothing.
それは、さっき見かけた女、何をしようとしていたのか、という意味ですね。別に何というわけでも。ええ、本当ですよ。特に彼女じゃなくても、どなたからでも構わないんです。今は、玉尾さんの方が楽しめそうですわ。
ああ、そうかい。
The voice had more sadness than hatred. Tamo took a deep breath before taking a forward-focused position. She was now like a wolf hunting prey in the night.
お前がもう困ってないって言うなら、俺にできることは一つっきりだ。ミトリ、てめえがどういう理由でそうなっちまったかは知らねえが、安心しろ。俺が始末をつけてやる。
Those words marked the start.
Set.
Yeah.
Set. We.
No.
タイプ G テンペスト4。
タイプ C テンペスト7。
ワン。
Boost codes coloring the soundscape of night, both summoning the Tempest, physical area types. Mitri was the first to act. Her sights were fixed, and the spindles spread in all directions were released at the same time.
人は所詮、夢と同じ織物。目を覚ませば消えてしまう幻。ですから、私が守って差し上げます。
The simultaneous attack from every direction was impossible to evade, and even if Tamo escaped above, the spindles would change trajectory to follow after her. Spindles that she'd been so confident in had been struck down, and she'd even lost sight of her enemy. This was shockingly unexpected. Tamo had slipped behind Mitri, who still had a smile on her face. The reason why Mitri had lost sight of her wasn't mere speed, but the unique technique Tamo had used. Not used. Even among the crowns, Mitri was probably the only one who knew that the normal Tamo Akihito wasn't going all out. Her ability to control others' bodies was her own, as her own. Let her see that as well. Let her see that well. Even so.
まさか、これほどとは思いませんでしたわ。
ぶっちゃければ俺の方がビビってるぜ。今のは結構マジでやったんだがな。
As she passed by, Tamo targeted a weak spot in Mitori's neck with a knife hand strike, but Mitori had actually evaded it just before it landed.
妙な避け方しやがる。気づく前にかわすとはさすがに俺も思わなかったよ。今ので分かったろ。お前は俺とじゃ。
Before she could finish, Mitori made her next move. A sea of invisible threads silently spread. They were a representation of a personal area, and they waved, wriggled, and slithered like a swarm of snakes in order to embrace Tamo whole. They covered the ground and planted the walls and covered the space above. Mitori's threads, as they are now, no longer just control people. They consumed reality like bristle tails. Ate paper. Whatever the threads touched, be it human or steel, as long as it was a paper layer known as reality, she would tear them apart. Tamo's speed was beyond reason, but the threads covered the area whole, making it impossible to escape them. In fact, Tamo wasn't even moving from where she was. The moment it seemed to Mitri that it would touch her. Mitri shook like she just touched the hot stove, and her threads retreated like a tide.
ふざけた話だな。
Tamo didn't see the invisible threads, but she could feel the pressure surrounding her. She looked round with a displeased expression and a glare. She moved forward as if it didn't mean anything to her, parting to see threads like the prophet from sacred scriptures. I wish the fucking, encoding overloading would stop. Oh my god.
玉緒さん、どうやって。
Tamo walked forward without a hint of panic. Mitori used her threads and spindles on her again and again, but all of them were dispersed before they even touched their
お
target.
前、時の先生の授業も忘れるぐらいボケちまってんのかよ。見てられねえな。
Personality was the very manifestation of an HMI's conscience, and it was impossible for two of them to melt into one. Naturally, in an encounter between two physical area-type HMIs, their areas completely repelled each other. Tokino called it the personal area non-intervention principle. Tamo was an HMI that enhanced her physical abilities by spreading her personal area on her body, while Mitri was an HMI that influenced others by turning her personal area into threads or spindles she used on others. Based on the principle, Mitori's threads and spindles were thoroughly incapable of touching Tamo.
だからさっき言いかけたろ。俺とじゃ相性が悪すぎるって。
Mitori clenched her teeth, but the one without a future here was Tamo. She wiped the cheek that had been torn by the first clash, left a trail of blood. The wound wasn't even a few millimeters deep, and it wouldn't be a problem in continuing the fight. Though that was only true if that wasn't supposed to touch her and act. Though that was only true if what wasn't supposed to touch her actually did do just that. Mitri Kaputayama was beginning to surpass the rules of halos. The woman was a seed that would consume the world if allowed to sprout. Tamo's instincts told her that if she missed the opportunity, she'd be the one to fall eventually. That was why she would give it her all to take it.
じゃあ、そろそろ行くぜ。今だから言うけど、お前が空子に教えてもらって焼いたクッキー、ひどい味だったよ。
A town with lights scattered around, an empty back alley. Winds clashed within the stillness of night. Mitri greatly increased her speed by removing the limiters on her body, while Tamo chased after her while moving even faster. The ground, walls, the air, two moved in every direction, looking like momentary shadows to any normal people who might have witnessed them. A fence next to the footpath bent. Traffic signs were split in the middle. A giant Okushima billboard in the middle of a high-rise building lost two middle letters to the destruction. Their clash only grew in speed and intensity, increasing the damage done. That was a car. The street lights were bursting one after another. A car at an intersection that something passed by in front of it, making it swerve and hit the guardrail. They rose like a double helix, running up the walls of a Scandinavian-style building. By the time they were on the roof, the battle was as good as over. Mitri felt one knee and moaned, not because of pain, but because of a spasm. Tortured by severe hunger, Mitri writhed like a fish out of water.
幕引きが自滅とはしゃれでねえな。いいよ、楽にしてやる。
Without any hesitation, she swung a knife hand at her ex-friend's neck. The attack that would split her spine and end her suffering. Hold on. I'm gonna take off my fucking coat. Better.
Narita!
Was stopped by the sudden appearance of Shinri Narita.
そうだ、今追いついた。よく発見してくれた。人手を集めた甲斐がある。
Still holding Tomo's right hand, Narita was giving her thanks to someone on the other end of a throwaway phone with a voice changer function.
人のデートに首突っ込んどいてよそ見かよ。つくづくいい性格してやがるな。
久しぶりに再会した学友に向けるにしては随分な挨拶ではないかね。
Narita ended the call. Ignoring him, Tomo tried to go after Mitri again, only to jump back a moment later. Her own instincts had told her to.
何しやがった。
さて、おおよそ分かってきたところだよ。
何わからねえこと言ってやがる。
The arm he just held was shaking. There was nothing wrong with it now, but she could have sworn that it had died back when he stopped it. Not even she knew what that meant, but that was what she had felt.
玉を少しでいい。
There we go, it's not white anymore. It just didn't make sense no matter how hard she tried. One might have been understandable, but the fact that the two it was had suddenly vanished without so much as a goodbye was just unbelievable.
この量もいきなり寂しくなっちゃったね。成田の父奉行と大義のボンボンはいてもいなくても、いるとむしろ邪魔ですが。
Boob baboon. In response to Iru's sharp words, Sorako forced a smile. The empty seat stood out a lot, making the mood somewhat lonely. Out of 7 étoiles there used to be, only 4 had gathered for this tea party. Saku, Iru, Tamo, and Sorako. Mitri and Narita had vanished while Taigi wasn't showing up.
そういえばサク、ミトリたちに連絡とか言ってなかったか。
Saku just shook her head.
そっか、ダメだったんだ。ミトリちゃんもだけど、成田くんも。そらこう、生父も生まれてちょっと気持ちよかったからってハマりすぎです。父しか脳にない男はサブカルチャーをメジャーにしようなんてブスを抜かす偉い人級に人類文化の敵。違うよ、そこまで気持ちよくなってないよ。でもどうして知ってるの？大義のボンボンも今やこの寮は男一人のハーレムウハウハ状態なのに、ろくに顔も見せないのが超怪しい。自分の当てずっぽう推理によれば、あやつこそ成田不在の真犯人。パイハンター成田を愛してしまったがゆえの犯行。僕よりおっぱいを選んだ君が許せないんだ。
The Hill Hunter.
マジ当てずっぽうで推理でもなんでもねえ。
ミトリが帰ってきたら、どっちが立ちか猫かで一晩熱く語り合いましょう。 エルちゃん、みとりちゃんは。
お家の事情で出てったのに帰ってくるわけねえだろ。
タコがそう言いました。だから帰ってくるのです。
It wasn't like Sakura to be so irresponsible. Tomo was worried that the fatigue from the past few days might have been taking its toll on her.
帰って来られたらいいなって言っただけよ。みとりに本当に事情があるのならそれでいいわ。
I mean, it is serious, but you know, not the reason
そ
we're
うじゃ
given.
ないのなら
Sakura speaking as if she didn't doubt that.
絶対にこのまま終わらせない。
サクってさ、時々むちゃくちゃ言うよな。変なところに首突っ込んで、お前までろくでもない目にあったらどうすんだよ。
私のことは別にいいの。友達が困っていたら助けたい。当たり前でしょ。みとりだけじゃなくて、玉緒も空子もエルも、みんな私の大切な友達よ。
友達。
それが友情なのです。わかったか、ヤンキー。ちなみにサクを困らせる奴がいたら、自分が打って出て殲滅です。じゃあ、エルちゃんが困った時は、僕が助けるね。みんな暑苦しいから、ひっつくのダメなのです。
ふん。
There was a cloudy sky above, and a light rain had just poured. The rain had stopped, but the clouds remained. One couldn't expect to see the moon tonight.
てめえとこうなるとはな。
人生とは意外であるから面白い。
Whoops. Mitori had lost consciousness shortly after I interfered. I brought her to an empty park and let her lie on a bench. On the way, Tamo and I explained our situation to one another. Tamo's actions from now on could decide Mitori's fate, so I had to be prepared for the worst.
玉緒が現れてくれたのは正直複雑な気分だよ。今となっては君たちの助けを借りるのも難しくなってしまった。
オンスロートだっけ。さっきの成田の話が本当ならそうなるよな。
大義から聞いた。嘘はない。
お前よくあんなやつそこまで信用するよな。頭悪いんじゃねえの。ま、俺の知ったこっちゃねえか。悪いが、今の話を聞かなかったとしても、俺はやっぱりお前にとっちゃ役札だぜ。
それは、玉緒がこの場にいる理由は、黒船の命令でも、策の指示でもない。
In that case, I could guess why she was here. She hadn't been ordered by Sakura, and then there was one possibility left.
お前、話が早すぎてかえってめんどくさいんだよ。
Based on her behavior, I'd already known her true nature, and that she'd been hiding it from the other crowns. But why? Could either be because she didn't want to reveal her identity for personal reasons, or because she couldn't do that because of who she worked for. It was obvious which one applied in Tamo's case.
それじゃあ、ミトリは始末する。
Tamo declared that she would dispose of her friend as casually as she would talk about the weather.
玉緒。それが君の本来の顔か。
Faced her head on. There were 3 meters between us. A single step would put us in a fighting distance. We glared at each other from a distance, but where we were close from endangering each other's lives. 3 days had passed since the battle up the mountains. Not all my wounds were healed, but if we were to go all out, Tomo was to be underestimated.
大義のやつを信用するって言ったのはお前だ。なら、分かってんだろ。
Yes, there were 2 important things to remember about Onslaught.
オンスロートを治療する方法はない。そして、接触した HMI もまた、30% を超える超高確率でオンスロートを発症する。
Basically, Onslaught syndrome was infectious. So really, it made sense that Kurofuna wasn't dispatching HMIs to deal with the matter. Even if Sakura could save Mitori, the very encounter would come with the risk of creating more onslaught syndrome cases. In fact, Tamo and I might have been infected already. I felt like I heard a silent clatter.
そこをどけよ、成田。
Cold words made me face
そ
her
れは
again.
スクールのためか。
俺がそんな善人に見えるか？
Well, for lack of a better word, Tomo was an ally of justice. She was doing it for the Academy order. She denied herself, but she was actually here out of consideration for her friend. She chased after her disappeared friend. On seeing the tragedy Mitori had become, she quickly chose to bring down her fist. It was to prevent any further tragedies and to keep Mitori's soul clean. Tomo was a person who did what was necessary when necessary. There were no better words to describe her.
君の立場が何者であっても、赤人玉緒は善悪の真実の何たるかを知っている人間だ。
はぁ何言ってんだバカ！俺をバカにしてんじゃねえぞ！
バカを二度続けて使うのはボキャブラリーに難ありとしか言えないな。
うっせえ！そんな話はしてねえだろ！
Tomo became all red. The honesty was as charming as always. Part of me wanted to enjoy the squirrel-like side of her a bit more, but I had to focus on me.
まだ方法はあるかもしれない。
あるなら時の先生がやらないわけはねえよ。
Tokino Yomi-san, one of the world's greatest authorities on HMIs, ordered Mitri to be disposed of. That alone was proof of how hopeless the situation was.
まだ諦めるのは早い。
まだってのはいつまで？地獄の釜の蓋が開いてから土下座して許してもらうってか。
万一の時はこの手で決着をつけよう。
Silence fell on the humid post-rain air of the night. In spite of my words, I was already aware of the coming destruction. The fatal moment came when Mitri would lose her soul forever. She knew Narita would have no choice but to end her himself.
お前にやれんのか？
約束しよう。必ずと。成田真理にとって約束とは神聖なもの。命と引き換えでも果たさずにはおられぬものだ。
Not saying a word, Tomo turned around and walked as if nothing had happened here. And she turned back for a moment.
こいつくれてやる。
She threw me a smartphone. It was a new model that had come out of just this spring, which made it a strange thing for someone as rough as Tomo to have.
正直今回の件は俺の手に余るんだよ。くそ。俺がやれるのは後にも先にも一つっきりだ。でもその
Despite being quite fearless, she was having trouble speaking something.
俺ミトリの友達でから。
その言葉は私が聞いてしまうには尊すぎる。いつかミトリに直接伝えたまえ。
いつかか。
きっとその日が来るだろう。
That much was certain, and I silently swore that I would make sure of it.
あのな、最後に忠告だ。できれば今渡したそれは使うな。どっちにしたってろくな結果にはならねえ。
忠告は真摯に受け止めよ
う。ミトリのことはてめえに預ける。でも本当にもしもの時は。
もしもの時など来ないよ。
バカ。お前はいっつも調子のいいことしか言わないんだから。
With that, Tomo instantly vanished with the agility of a night hunter. I couldn't just stay here. I had to hide before the Academy's dogs found us. I also needed time to think about how to handle Mitori. For a moment I looked at her face. She was an innocent girl given a terrible fate that wanted to save her from it. But how? Put the smartphone Tomo had given me into my upper pocket and carried Mitori on my back. I soon felt her move. I was tense for a moment. What if Mitori wasn't Mitori now?
Narita-san.
The voice I heard made all the tenseness escape my body. That was Mitori Kabutoyama's voice. I could recognize it anywhere.
玉緒さんとのお話聞こえておりました。
何も考えずにもうしばらく休んでいたまえ。
She said nothing more, but I could feel her shiver. I could still feel her shiver.
行こう。
I dealt away with my hideout, but I had no trouble finding another good place to hide. Okushima was a rural area with just a little over 200,000 people. The area outside of town was sparsely populated. There was no shortage of abandoned buildings not worth the destruction, time, and funds. I chose one that had no neighboring houses and didn't stand out much, and gathered several days' worth of supplies to make it a proper temporary hideout. Silent night was distance to cover, but even with Mitri on my back, it was easy to make it all the way to the destination. Though I had to be careful if I wasn't spotted by the Academy's dogs. I chose a hideout that was away from the populated south banks of Tenkawa, not because I wanted to avoid the Academy, but out of fear for the worst-case scenario. As things were, it would only come in a few days' time. The abandoned building had only been empty recently. It had only been emptied recently. It was in a relatively good state. That was interesting how quickly the weathering had begun after the owners left it. It was far from a pleasant place, but it functioned well enough as a hideout for now. Whatever happened next was a place I would stay for, a long time, and it wasn't a place I would stay for a long time, and I lowered Mitri onto the simple bed I had prepared. 3 days had passed since the battle in the forest. She was actually in an unexpectedly good state, meaning that the situation was awful. The wounds from the forest had closed, leaving not a single mark. The injuries had been heavy. I couldn't expect such healing even with her halo. You couldn't expect such healing. In fact, even the wounds she'd sustained in her fight against Tamo had closed on the way here. Mitri Kaputayama's onslaught cinder was progressing. She was becoming more and more inhuman.
Mitori, 気分はどうかね？発作を起こしていたようだが、どこか苦しくはないだろうか？
Hiding my shock and perplexion, I talked as calmly as I could. Telling her the truth would only corner her.
Mitori.
はい。
She was looking around as if she didn't realize that someone was calling her name. Then she quickly made a face I found familiar.
心配していただいてありがとうございます。もう大丈夫ですわ。思考が少しはっきりしなかったのも今は平気。成田さんが迎えに来てくださったおかげかもしれません。
君からそのようなセリフを聞かせてもらえるとは実に光栄だ。
I instantly knew that a smile was forced. The attack had definitely subsided, but the transformation was taking a toll on both her mind and body. It hurt me how she was trying to keep me from worrying.
眠れるようなら少しでも眠って体力を回復させた方がいい。
お待ちください。
I tried to cover her with the sheets, but she grabbed my hand as I did. There was barely any power in her grip, but it was full of desperation.
その前に教えてください。
She was thoroughly overwhelmed, and she made no effort to look away from her problems. The strong nature of her being somehow made my chest tighten so much it hurt.
わかった。
Couldn't resist such an earnest request. I told her the most important bits of what Taigi told me, adding some of my own deduction.
オンスロート症とは制御を失ったハローによる肉体の侵食。それがミトリの変異の原因だ。その昔 HMI は鬼や天狗、いわゆる人外の魔とされた。真偽はともかくオンスロート症を発症した HMI はまさしく人ではなくなってしまう。精神と肉体は不可分だ。肉体が変質すれば精神もまた影響を受ける。オンスロート化した HMI は
どうなるのですか？
Even in this dark room, I could tell that her face was pale. Even so, she wanted to hear.
文字通り怪物化する。オンスロートは現れるたびに甚大な被害をもたらした。それは根本的に人間では太刀打ちできない怪物だ。危険度ではスライダーをはるかにしのぐ。
その上感染すると。
Honestly, didn't want to tell her this, but she heard me talk to Tamo, so there was no point in hiding.
オンスロートと接触したものだけが危険なわけではない。 人間以外に変質してしまうかもしれない恐怖。オンスロート症の存在を知るだけで HMI は不安定化し、発症のリスクが高まってしまう。
It was an epidemic that lived in memes. The DNA of the soul. I repeat a phrase I've uttered before in this exact series. We all are the sum of our memes. I still hate the fact that I said that out loud for all the internet to fucking hear. I mean, I say all the internet. It's not like that many people watch my stuff, so my reputation isn't completely fucked yet. That was the reason why Taigi hadn't talked before the very end, whether the Academy was doing so much to hide its existence.
だからこそスクールはオンスロート化の兆候が見えた HMI を例外なく処理、つまり間引きしてきた。
だから私が狙われた。でもそれなら私のせいで成田さんや玉尾さんまで。
Mitri put her hand against her chest and clenched it so hard it became pale. She was probably thinking it was best for her to just disappear, but...
私や玉尾のことは気にしなくていい。
でも
私も玉尾も自らの意志で選択し行った。どんな結果になろうと全ては己の問題だ。君が責任を感じる必要はどこにもない。それに今のところ発症している様子はない。リスクが高くなると言ってもせいぜい3割程度。10人に7人は平気ということではないかね。
はい。
She didn't seem fully convinced, but she nodded regardless.
重要なのはオンスロートがどれだけ危険かよりもどうすれば治療できるかだ。
でも治療法はないと。
夜店時野になくても地上のどこにも存在しないとは決まっていないだろう。
はい。そうですね。
Her smile was like the dying flame of a candle, and it made me feel profoundly sad.
私の家にはオンスロートらしき伝承が残されていた。オンスロートが古くから存在するものならこれまでに何らかの対策があったかもしれない。
成田さんは後天性型だと伺っていましたけれど、ご実家には先天性の家系のような言い伝えが残されているのですか？
しまったか。
Knight just sits there like... Fuck. I wanted to give her hope and spoke something that broke my cover. No matter, there was no need to hide it from her now.
私はとある古い一族の出身でね。古い伝承によれば時折真意の力を持った者が現れたらしい。いわゆる先天性型の家系だったのだろう。私の代にはすっかり血も薄れていたが。
It wasn't a story about Narita, but a family now long lost. The Mikados, as they were called, were said to sometimes produce inhuman people. I know the actual truth, but when we were young, me and my sister just accepted it without questioning. The Mikados were gone. Funigema and the 3 traitors had consigned my parents, my dear sister, Not, and every other member of the family into the fire. I'd been meant to die as well, but by some miracle I'd survived and made it back here. Driven by hate and rage, I returned to have my revenge.
黒船、必ず貴様のところまで行く。お前たち全員にふさわしい最後をくれてやる。
成田さん、どうかされまして？
何がかね？
とても怖い顔。
Mitri looked at me with worry, for I realized that I was clenching my fist so hard it was bleeding. So I could only guess how awful my expression was. Pitiful of me to make Mitri worry more than she had to.
すまない。故郷にはあまり良い思い出がないものだからね。
My response made Mitri giggle.
何かおかしなことを言っただろうか？
そうではなくて、あなたがそんな殊勝な顔で謝罪されるところを 初めて見た気がしますわ。
そうだろうか。自分では常に慎み深く振る舞っているつもりなのだが。
Visha heard that you would probably...
今世紀最強のジョークを聞かされました。ははは。
Say something like that.
故郷はお嫌いですか？
As I considered philosophical questions, Mitori asked that. The moonlight coming from between the curtains gave her a bluish tint. For some reason, the sight reminded me of the side profile of my mother.
好きや嫌いの問題ではないのだよ。私の故郷はなくなってしまった。
それは、ごめんなさい。
気にしないでほしい。ずっと以前のとうに終わってしまったことだ。今となってはあったと覚えている者もいないだろう。
Hello? The fuck? My PC does not like the flames. It is scared. Oh, we've only been going for an hour and a half. Yeah, my PC is like properly shitting the bed right about now. Yeah, hello lady stopped working.
だが、私は忘れない。
Daga. Yeah, the game just really does not like the flames. By Lord. And heavens above even, kind of. Jesus help.
誰が忘れても手を下した罪人どもが忘却の彼方に捨て去ったとしても、私だけはこの胸に焼き付いた光景を見失うことはない。
Was lost, couldn't come back. The dead couldn't return. Yet the scoundrels were still alive. Is that tolerable? No.
復讐を果たせ。成田真理。
Even if that led to me expiring, I wouldn't fear it. She Narita was a wraith, a mere shade of the past that had come back to haunt those who wronged him.
でも成田さん、どれだけ変わってしまっても故郷は変わりなくここにありますわ。
Mitri puts her hand on her
やが
chest.
て豊満へ至る胸の膨らみ。
心。故郷とは土地でも人でもありません。いいことも悪いこともそこであったすべてが今の自分へ続いて支えている。
Is fucking the web helper like deciding to crash my party again? Get up and feel like it is. Why is the game overlay UI on? I don't need that right now. Oh, there he is. Fucking knew it. The web helper opened up again. Fuck off.
あなたも私もきっと故郷の一部なのですわ。そうやって故郷というものは続いていくのでしょう。
人は死ぬ。記憶は色あせ、語り継ぐ者もいなくなる。この地上の一切は結局幻のように溶け去って、後には糸の一切れも残りはしない。
弱気みたいに聞こえますわよ。あなたらしくもない。
Reached out, traced my fingers on her face. Wasn't done consciously. Her skin was fatigued, yet still charming and warm. Her jawline was even more dainty and fragile than I imagined.
命とは刹那の光だ。まばゆく燃えて消え去る。ほんの一瞬の花だよ。
それなら、なおさら。消えるまでは、精一杯生きなければなりませんわね。
君にそんな日が来るとしても、先の話だろう。まずは、体を治さなければな。
そうですわね。自分が弱気になってはいけませんわ。
She said that as though speaking to herself. She was faced with a hopeless future and a promising death, and she was doing her best to act as natural as possible out of consideration for me. Is this the strength of someone who'd accepted fate? Mitri had dreams and hopes. Those things were about to be taken away from her, despite her doing nothing wrong.
今夜はもう遅い。話の続きはまた明日にしよ
う。ええ、そうします。おやすみなさい。
Maybe the meat was a problem there on a day where I didn't really eat that much. Mitri was fast asleep soon after she laid down. Her face was pure, free of all pain. She didn't have much time left. Rage at whoever gave her this face had begun gathering within me. Careful not to wake her up, I took a deep breath and let the heat out. Shindini Narita was familiar with this mental state. I had seen many people die in my life. Valuable deaths, meaningless deaths, sudden deaths. Even deaths dealt by my own hand. That was why I knew what to do. Instead of lamenting, I would chase after the faint possibility. For there was nothing to gain from standing still. Tokino Yomise was the greatest authority on HMI research. She had no means of treating this. It was fair to call it incurable. What would I do then? Mitori's onslaught syndrome was still progressing. I had to at least stop it from becoming worse. Would have been better to move to a place with better equipment, but that would definitely attract the Academy's attention.
必ず見つける。
I would arrange my thoughts and think about what to do next at dawn. For now, I would merely rest. Harmonize my body and mind using the breathing of Gebd before taking a light nap. As a result of my training, I was on high alert even when sleeping. If enemies drew near, I would awake right away. After some time, I felt movement in the room. It was still dark, and there was still time. There was time left until dawn. There was no hostility in the presence, and my awakening was mild, like I was floating up from water. Slightly on my eyes, I saw Mitri within the moonlight coming through the window. She was looking away. Her clothing was rustled, and I saw her slender pale back.
Narita さん、起きておられるのでしたら、手伝っていただけませんこと？
Oh dear, she realized that I was awake. This was surely due to her physical area halo, the Tempest 7. She must have noticed the awakening-related changes involved in awakening. If I would control my body using Geb's method, it was difficult to hide from her sight.
干渉についてはいいのかね。私としてはこのまま眺めているのは大いに賛成だが。
今夜だけは特別に許します。
As told, I helped her out.
体汚れたままでは寝苦しくて。
I prepared water, a container, and a towel. She was of a good upbringing, yet all I could give her were these modest and plain items and an abandoned house no one could live in. I used a wet towel to wash her side to side. I felt like I was dealing with glass that would shatter if I used too much strength. Being as careful as possible, I thoroughly cleaned her pale skin. The past 3 days, Mitri had been unconscious or wandering with Okushima. I had trouble finding her because she hadn't stayed in one place. 3 days might have seemed long in the world of hygiene, but the sweat and filth on her wasn't too bad. Her cool skin was pleasant to the touch too. From her slender arms to her sloping shoulders, from her bewitching back to her promising breasts, refined hips, wonderful breasts, unexpectedly plump behind, breasts, long legs, breasts, breasts, breasts.
胸ばかりきれいにしなくても。
She She looked fatigued all over, but the line of her small yet beautiful breasts was a work of art that didn't lose any of its value.
胸はとても重要な場所なのだよ。
こんな時なのに、本当に成田さんらしいですわね。
Mitori quickly put on her upper clothing, giving a sad goodbye to her chest. I prepared to put the towel away, put away the towel, but then
ミトリ。
何ですの？
So facing away from me, Mitri put her hand on mine, though it was more like she was grabbing it.
君にしては大胆だ。
触れているのが？それとも女の方からこんな真似をするのははしたない？殿方がどう思われているのか知りませんが、女にだって異性を求める時くらいはありますわ。
Still merely touching me wasn't enough. She brought her body close and clung to me.
積極的な乙女も愛おしいものだよ。異なる花では美しさも違う。バラの気高さと月見草のつつましさを比べるのは物を知らない愚か者だけだ。
Making the maidens do all the work was rude, so I embraced her back.
覚えていてください。
Prayer-like whisper escaped her mouth, escaping her mouth, gouged my heart like the sharpest blade.
私のことを、ここにいたことを、あなたの小さな片隅で構いませんわ。きっと覚えていてください。
Was she saying that because this was the journey's end? Did she want to, at the very least, leave the proof of her existence within someone? There was no one to tell the tale, memories became nothing but untouchable information. Even if the overwhelming flow of time eventually washed them all away, people never stopped trying to cling to their memories and pass them on. It was like a bit of futile resistance against the speed of the world.
君は HMI だろう。人の可能性と呼ばれるものが自らの可能性を手放してどうする？命ある限り立ち向かえ。
Fight despair, hardship, resignation, fate. Keep on resisting the overwhelming speed of the world. Possibility was there for as long as you were alive.
私はそうしてこの国に舞い戻った。
それなら、そう思える力をください。
君はよく似ているな。
それはどなたに？
Mitori's pale face was somewhat reminiscent of my mother. She was in my distant memory. My mother was a sad person. She spent most of her time at the corner of the large old mansion, barely talking to father, almost always all alone. Even as a clueless child, I could tell that she wasn't a Mikado by choice. In spite of that, she was a true mother. There's something I'll tell you once you're older. A few days before it all became ash. She called me to her room, which was quite a rarity, and said that after putting my hand on her hand on my head. But please love your sister. Those were the last words that Shunsei Mikado had heard her say. Whatever she'd wanted to tell me burned up and died with her, and that fulfilled my last promise to her.
君はやはり君だよ、ミトリ。
Cruelty, contradiction, tragedy. Mitori accepted it all. It was nothing but a feature she'd shared with my mother.
私は君を守ってみせる。
Feeling I'd forgotten over the 7 years of seeking vengeance had come back to me. Mitori's willingness to accept fate had made blood run through my soul, which had been sullied by rage and vengeance. There was a small warmth gathering in my arid wasteland of a heart. I found it oh so dear. The rage didn't abate, my curse and hate couldn't be dispelled. Vengeance was a part of Shinrin Narita, and it was something that had to be achieved no matter what. But now, if the slice of mine wouldn't burn up and expire once vengeance was mine, if it had a future, I wanted to have Mitori for myself. Not just as a memory, but someone to live this life with, even though I knew it was a desire that didn't suit me. It was brazen of me to have this wish. It cost much bloodshed, taken many lives, created a lot of destruction. With my hands so stained, it was purely sinful for me to wish for peaceful days. A day would come where my many sins would be duly punished. But until then, I would live my life to the fullest. Putting it into words was vexing. I gave her a kiss as soft as a feather's touch.
Mitori, 君は美しい.
That was a trite sentence. The real thing required no exaggeration.
このような場での男のざれ言は信じてはいけないと教わっておりますから。
お母上からかね。実にできた方だ。
高崎さんから。
Eru Takazaki. Clearly a person one couldn't underestimate. Despite what Mitori said with her mouth, but eyes told me that she wanted for us to become even closer. The future was uncertain, but a wish for the moment was clear. She was clinging to me as though to hold on to the slim bond and forget how faint the hope was.
愛しているよ。
I told her what I had yet to say.
知っておりました。
She smiled as though victorious. Some claimed that in these relationships, the one to fall in love first were the losers. And now I couldn't help but feel that those sages were right. he should have believed he should have believed the random crap that Kaguya was talking about in Love is War. After the deed, we washed our bodies with the towel again before changing our clothing. There was no trace of the sweet lewdness from before, but there were faint remnants of warmth on our skins. The sky above Okushima was full of stars. The light of the nigh full moon was soothing my heated body and heart.
私、みんなよりも一足早く大人になってしまいましたわ。
ふむ、奥ゆかしさこそ日本語の美しさだね。
でも、おとなしさんたちにはもう会うこともできませんけれど。
時間はある。治った後でいくらでも会えばいい。
そうですわね。
The moonlight shone on her as she smiled. She was like a battered pilgrim walking through a wasteland, and not giving up on the final bit of hope.
成田さんが約束してくださるのでしょう。
君を守るというのであれば。
玉尾さんとのお話、聞いておりましたのよ。
That could only mean that she was talking about my promise to dispose of Mitori if all hope was lost.
これは私がまだ幼くて何も上手にできなかった頃、舞踏の先生が初めての褒め言葉と一緒にくださいました。
She handed me the fan she'd always used.
私は兜山みとりです。誇りまでなくしてしまうのは耐えられない。自分が他の何かになってしまうぐらいなら、魂まで汚されてしまうのなら。
She gathered resolve to hand me the fan. Certainly couldn't accept it yet.
待て。思考して希望せよ。
存じておりますわ。デュマですのね。
どんな時でも希望を失ってはならない。虹の果てを目指すなら、まず信じて歩き出すことだ。
虹？
虹の果てを見てみたいと幼馴染と語らって、家を抜け出して探しに行ったバカ者がいてね。
それでどうなりましたの？
山一つ越えても虹ははるかに遠かった。二つ目を目指したところであっさりと見張りに連れ戻された。その土地はひどく閉鎖的で、子供どころかほとんどの者は外へ出ることを許されていなかったのだよ。
結局たどり着けなかったんですね。
今の私は虹に果てなどないと知っている。それでも追いかけて走り出すことに何の矛盾があるだろう。これまでに多くの者が虹を追ったのだろう。これからも多くの者が追うのだろう。君も 最後まで歩むのを止めるな。それがどれほど険しい道であっても、力尽きた時にはこの私が後の全てを引き受けよう。
あなたはこんな時まで受け入れて死ぬ安らぎではなく、最後まであがいて破れる無様を選べと、そうおっしゃいますのね。傲慢で尊大で残酷で身勝手で。でもそんなあなただから。
Silence returned. The beautiful moon above, indifferent to all the filth below, watched over the brief show woven by mankind with a detached gaze.
でも万に一つ希望を手にできたとしても、その時の私はあなたの敵になりますわ。
Sneaky words pierced my heart like a knife. She realized the reason why she needed Narita had come to the academy.
成田さんの敵はどなたですの？
どうして分かったのかね。
There was no real shock in this. Strangely enough, it made sense that she would realize. There were pieces of the puzzle all over, though. Surprisingly, how quickly she put them together.
これだけ一緒にいたのですもの。見当ぐらいはつきます。ずっとあなたを見ておりましたから。
私はこの怒りを憎悪を果たすために舞い戻った。奴らが忘れても死者は眠らないのだと知らしめるために。愛を、情けを、その全てを奪った裏切り者どもにふさわしきって対を。私は黒船に、そして残る2人の裏切り者に呪われた最後をくれてやるだろう。奴らのむくろを死んでいった一族や妹への鎮魂の祭壇に捧げるのだ。
そうですか。あなたはスクールにあだなすものならば、兜山みとりはきっとそれを阻みます。
This wasn't surprising either. It was actually somewhat sad how easy it was for me to accept. Mitori and I were alike. We couldn't change our way of life, no matter what. That was why we wouldn't be ourselves until the bitter end.
理事長の過去に何があるとしても、スクールがどんな秘密を隠しているとしても、あそこには音無さんがいます。過ちがあるなら必ず正してくれる。時間はかかるかもしれません。でもいつかきっと。
信じているのだね。
私、音無さんと戦ったことがありますのよ。
それは初耳だ。
その頃の私は今よりもずっと未熟で、他人を認めることも知らない小娘で、音無さんは筆頭にふさわしい人間ではないと、そんなことを考えて。
The way she spoke made me feel like she was merely looking back at the event, not relaying it to me. I silently urged her to continue.
一矢報いるどころか、本当に手も足も出ず、気がつけばリビングの床に倒れていました。音無さんが手加減していなければ、その場で命を落としていたかもしれない。あれはなんて優しい夏の夢だろう。
She squinted her eyes with joy. Based on what she was saying, I could only guess.
敗れたのが嬉しかったのかね。
生まれて初めて完膚なきまでに負けました。ただの砂鉄ではありません。己の力の届かないものがあるという事実を思い知らされたのです。
So that defeat must have been what made her recognize others for the first time.
彼女は
Someone messaged me.
音無作は己のみを世界と思い込む HMI の愚昧に絶対の他者というあり方をもたらすもの。己で世界を塗り替えようという HMI の傲慢を一振りで打ち砕く。だからこそ音無作だけがこのスクールの ただ一つの星足り得るのです。それからのことは、些細なことまで、どれもこれも忘れがたい思い出。狭い世界を越えて、一歩外へ踏み出せば、何もかもが新しくて、何もかもがまばゆかった。私は、音無し策を信じておりますから。あなたがスクールにあだなすというのなら、私の愛する人たちを守るために、私は最後まで立ちはだかるでしょう。
She could only live one way, and she would live that way until the end. The soul was so bright it made me squint.
君の信じる道を行きたまえ。
In that case, there was only one thing for Shinri Narita to do. Or protect Mitori-Route until the end, no matter what it would bring. Mitri soon went to sleep as though she lost consciousness. I couldn't believe that it was just because of fatigue. I was trying to act normal, but my body was already far beyond that point. Even when I touched her, she felt different from a human. The onslaught syndrome was progressing by the second. Under normal circumstances, she would already be far beyond the point of no return. Tagi had told me there had never been a case of regaining their sanity after succumbing to onslaught syndrome. Mitori had already come back from the onslaught syndrome state thrice. The first night in that forest, and against Tamao. Though I didn't know was responsible for supporting her. The power of my halo, or my own ability to control her, or her own ability to control her bodily functions, was miraculous that he was still even conscious.
Mitori.
Would you expire like this? No, certainly not. What came at the end of the onslaught syndrome wasn't death, but transformation. Mitori-Route was becoming something beyond human. She didn't have much time left. Wait until daybreak and made my move.
ミトリ、この隠れ家の外には出ないよう必要になりそうなものは全て用意してある。
Still laying on the basic bed, she watched as I finished preparing. She was in an even worse state than last night. Must have been difficult to get up. In her case, it meant that it was becoming more difficult to control her halo.
万一の場合はこの携帯を使いたまえ。ボタン一つで私の端末までメールが送られるようにしてある。
成田さん、どちらへ？
I thought that she would feel uneasy if left alone. If she didn't show it, and made the best smile she could. The consideration pierced my heart.
君を救う手がかりを追う。
I would search for the last hope. The cure for onslaught syndrome was an absurd endeavor, much like trying to find a single piece of cloth in the desert. But I was the one who told her to keep fighting, so I wouldn't allow myself to stop. I was worried about leaving her all alone myself, but I was the only one who could still operate. If I stayed with her, it would only curse the footsteps of the coming fate, while indulging in whatever little consolation we had. The important thing to do now was to keep moving forward. Sun-green evening was retreating. Dusk was close. I tried hard, but finding a fragment of such a small hope was hard, especially when I was being chased by the academy. Okushima was a land separated from the main island by sea, letting it avoid foreign blood for a long time. This meant that it was full of unbroken lineages. I chased after contact and to talk to some of them, only to end up gaining nothing. I only learned a couple of things. One of them was the fact that old lineages often hid onslaught syndrome under some sort of code. Another one was that the only way of dealing with it was killing them before they assumed the form of a genuine devil. Finally, I learned that there was a bloodline of born HMIs here in Okushima that had fallen when one of them developed onslaught syndrome. None of them were hints about how to save Mitori. It's not true that Tokino Yomise was the greatest authority in this field. She declared that it was impossible. Doing it in just a few days was the same as flipping the world upside down. very least, I wanted to move Mitri to a specialized institution. However, if I wanted a place where she couldn't be touched by the academy, we had to be we had to at the very least leave this island. I knew for a fact that all routes leading out of T Prefecture were all part of the network monitored by the academy.
アリの這い出る隙間もないとはこれか。恐れ入るな。
The only way to break out was by force. With Mitri being unable to even move properly, that was a real challenge. I had no choice but to rely on the method I was told to avoid. After checking that there were no academy observers nearby, I sat on the inconspicuous bench in the park and turned on the device in my hand. It was a smartphone given to me by Tamil. Didn't want them to use GPS to find the location of my hideout, so I could only use it a good distance away from it. The moment I turned it on, I realized that, as I was expecting, it was sending its location. Probably also had a program to make sure it wouldn't be used more than once. Once this exchange was over, all the records would surely be deleted. It was already past midnight, but someone picked up in no time. I had no time for pleasantries, so I went straight to the point.
何と呼べばいいのかね。
彼女ではないのですね。
Had to be a surprise, but the person on the other end seemed unshaken. A woman, young voice, she was probably in her 20s. Calm, intelligent manner speaking. Based on her breathing, I could tell that she was well endowed. I didn't notice any of the danger that came with her being part of this industry, but for all I knew, she could have been hiding it.
端末を預かったものだ。スクールに追われている。といえば、話は通じるか？
Silence. She was probably gauging the truthfulness of my words. This person X was probably an agent from Tomo Akahito's employer's side. Based on Tomo's behavior, she didn't answer to her directly, but she was likely in a position that had her deal with certain special circumstances. To put it more simply, she was a point of contact for a group that had interest in which didn't align with the academies.
信用します。私のことはセブンと呼んでください。
では、私のことは素晴らしきイレブンと呼びたまえ。
イレブン。最初に互いの立場を明確にしておきましょう。
ふむ。人の話を聞かないと言われたことはないかね。
Whoops.
いいえ、聞きすぎると言われたことなら、それよりも本題に入りますが、私はある種の特別な人間たちの保護に携わっています。
What a strange reaction. There was no lie in her introduction. It made sense considering that, although Tomo may have had a reason to entrap me, she had no reason to do anything like that to Mitori. Still, Seven's reaction weren't too pro-like. I didn't see her in front of me, but I didn't feel a hint of the coldness and calculating nature that always came with people of this kind.
現在、スクールに追われている者が1名、負傷している。できるだけ早く専門の施設へ移さなければならないが、奥島への出入りは全てチェックされている。
指示に従っていただけるなら、20時間以内に脱出方法とそれ以後の身柄の安全を。
具体的にはどうするのかね。スクールは非公然ながら日本政府の機関だ。安全だという保証は。
The question made her panic a bit.
それは名前、戸籍、場合によっては顔も変えて我々の持つ施設に保護します。システムでもたやすくは手が出せないところです。どうかしましたか？
いや、偶然目の前を人の姿をした赤い化け猫が通りかかってね。珍しくて驚いていたのだよ。
I hadn't expected to hear that name here in this distant island. The system was a myth of the underworld, a secret society which was basically the underworld of the underworld. Its network so large in scope it wasn't even clear if it existed. Well, if the legendary system was beyond the academy, it made sense why it had so much wealth and power. What was more surprising was that Seven even knew the name. That's the fact that she didn't seem to be very aware of its gravity. This wasn't some calculated motion that would work as a bluff. It seemed like it just slipped out of her mouth. was just a careless miss. It's hard for me to believe that someone who knew of the system and lived could be so unprepared. She's more cool-headed and intelligent than I assumed.
お見せできる証拠はありませんが、私からは政府も一枚岩ではないとだけ。
The answer was more or less what I'd expected. Kurofune and his people had built the academy nearly by force, creating many enemies in the process. The group behind Seven might have also been the ones who mobilized Syro. Not even a web that encompassed the world whole could bind the malice of men.
夜店時野がサジを投げた患者でも対処できるだろうか。
それはどういう意味でしょうか。
質問を変えよう。夜店時野が解決できなかった課題と曲がりなりにも向き合える者が君たちの仲間にはいるのかね。
夜店時野は横断的な分野に君臨する現代最高峰の知性の一人です。特に HMI をはじめとするある種の異能の研究に関して彼女と同等以上のものとなると、米国のジョン・ダーウィン、ドイツのウォルフラム・フランケンシュタイン、インドのアリアバータ・サーカー、それから日本のグランドプロフェッサー。
There are three of those named. Like Tokino Yomi said they were part of LSOM and referred to reverence as the Quadriga. They would indeed be sages on the level of Tokino Yomi said.
その4人の協力を得ることは。
それは我々にも無理です。彼らはそれぞれ何らかの形でシステムとつながりのある人物ですから。ただ状況を詳しく教えていただければ現状を維持する手段を提供できるかもしれません。
そうか。では話はここまでだ。
我々が信用できない。
種もなしに帽子からウサギは出ない。ノウハウがあるという君たちは少なからぬ実績を積んできた。つまり君たちが行うのは保護などではなく新しいモルモットの確保だ。
I could feel her lose her words over the phone. It wasn't because I found out she was lying, but because I pointed out a truth she wanted to ignore. It was a very virtuous and honest reaction. I was overthinking things by assuming it was all a bluff. She was hard to read, even with my experience.
それは確かに様々な面で協力を求めることはあるでしょう。でもそれはスクールに比べ
マシだと言いたいのかね。
Kurofune was my unforgiving enemy, but I didn't doubt that he built the academy with nothing but sincerity and resolution. I only lived in that ivory castle for a little while, but I could tell that Kurofune Mikado was serious about nurturing HMIs to be a possibility of the next generation. Accepting Seven's offer would let me escape the academy, or at least buy us some time in the fight to get against it, but...
私は約束をした。
That was why Shinji Narita couldn't accept this choice. I couldn't lose sight of what I had to protect, no matter what it would bring. Both Mitri and I were the kind of people who could only live one way, even though we knew it was foolish. How could I ever even think of hoping she would live at the cost of compromising that? I ended the call. I expected all the info on the device had been cleared. It was a piece of junk now. Nothing useful could come of it. I casually threw it and it sank and fell into the river. I'd lost most of the paths now. There were few things Shinji Narita could do. Mitri didn't have much time left. It expired. I would do what I had to without any hesitation.
Mitori.
An unpleasant feeling filled my chest. It felt as though there was sand rubbing against it. This was always accompanied by something bad happening. I sped up my walking. Disregarding any observers and tailors, I had been wearing only a simple disguise. I hurried back to the hideout. And is gone. Mitri knew that the end would come before dawn. Once Narita left, she'd suffered an attack, made particularly intense by all the holding back she did. Her consciousness lapsed over and over, and each time she did, she couldn't help but fear that she wouldn't wake up again. The thirst and hunger overwhelmed her every waking second. As she writhed due to the endless torture, she had eventually realized it was night. Her guess was that she wouldn't see the light of day again.
ラリタ。
She knew Narita hadn't returned even after dusk. She didn't know where he was, but she knew he was giving his all to save her. Mitori herself, however, had accepted her end long ago. She had to choose between slowly, pitifully wasting away in abject fear and death. She would choose the latter. She'd only clenched her teeth and lived because of him. Cruel as he was, he told her to struggle until the bitter end. She wanted this harsh kindness of his to embrace her, so she fought against the coming end, despite knowing that it was hopeless. Mitori Kabutoyama was dying with every passing moment. All that made her was being replaced. That was less of a death and more of a takeover. The fear of defilement was many times greater than the fear of mere death. Her throat was in pain. She wanted water, but merely moving her fingers a few centimeters required all the effort on her part. Her flesh and bone, even the last resort that was her halo, weren't working as she wanted. Her consciousness lapsed again. 20 minutes passed.
せめてあの人が戻ってくるまで。
Just how long had she waited at this point? At the moment, the pain of the attacks left her so torn apart that she couldn't feel the passage of time anymore.
どこへ行きたい？
There was something looking down at her. Mitori was crawling like an insect, unable to even stand as the entity watched her with curiosity.
あなたはどこへ行きたい？
The sweetness of the whisper made chills go down her
私
spine.
の旅路はここで終わりです。それでいいの？それでいい。それにここで終わってしまった方がこれ以上あの人に迷惑をかけずに済むから。あの人は迷惑とは思っていないでしょう？そうかもしれない。でも私はやっぱり悔いている。あの夜、夜会の日、助けられないで死んでいればよかった。だから私はここで。
The edges of her consciousness, crushed by despair and sadness. At the edge of her consciousness, crushed by despair and sadness, there was a strange presence. She desperately looked around. There were 1, 2, 3, 4 red lights in the empty room. They all came with strange objects. They weren't as tall as adult chests. They were as tall as an adult chest. Their main bodies were reminiscent of great white shark heads and were supported by 4 angular legs.
金属、機械。
The red lights came from the middle of their bodies, specifically the single cameras as devoid of emotion as a shark's eyes. The metal sharks silently surrounded Mitori as though they smelled her blood.
まだ意識があるのか、カブトヤマミトリ。時の先生。
The voice was electronic, but she could recognize it as belonging to her tier 2.
これは一種のオートマトンだ。ビヨンドテクノロジーによる試作品、ガルハリアス。急遽投入せざるを得なかった。お前相手に人間では話にならないからな。
Needless to say, Tokino was nowhere near. She was giving orders to the machines from far away.
すでに4度目のはずだが、元の自我を保っているとは、率直に言って信じがたいな。時の先生、私をどうするつもりなのですか？これから処理する。
The words were so cold that you would feel as though the machines themselves spoke them. Being told so plainly that she would die almost made her laugh instead of burst out in anger. The device given to her by Narita was next to the pillow, but it was meaningless to use it at this point. In fact, Mitori no longer even had the power to push the keys. Faced with the end, she was so calm that it surprised even her. Mitori believed that she was extremely machine-like at the core. If she really realized that nothing could be done, she would stop resisting and accept reality. She and Narita were much alike, but also opposed to one another. That was probably why she was so attracted. His back carried an intensity Mitori didn't have. She found it dazzling.
モンスロートだから です。
帝大義から聞いたのか。この場所を発見できた理由を教えよう。オンスロート化に伴う事象変異を観測する手段がある。これまでに3度。20分前、4度目を確認した。ある強度を超えた観測可能な事象変異。つまり、カブトヤの緑、お前に残された時間はもうない。人類は君の生存を許容できない。
Mitri Kapatoyama would now die. She herself had removed many sickly plants for the sake of the garden. And now she was on the other end. There was no contradiction in Tokino's actions. She was doing the right thing. She would accept it all. She would face her end head on, dying as she lived, proud and with her head held high. Despite that, words not even she'd expected escaped her lips.
何一つしていないのに、どうしてこんな。
The warmth she hadn't expected surged from the deepest part of her heart. It was a strong burning emotion she'd never felt before. Mitri had hopes and dreams. She had many things she wanted to do. At the very least, she wanted to have a reason why she had to have it all taken from her so one-sidedly and unjustly. Oh, how shallow. She had taken away many futures because it was the right thing to do. What was happening here was just a reversal of the role. Why wasn't she able to accept it? Why did she cling to life so pathetically? Slot syndrome couldn't be ignored. It had to be dealt with. Mitri could understand that well. But why was it her?
どうして私なのですか。どうしてオンスロートに理由をせめて教えてください。
Tokino's brief silence was her thinking whether she had the time to answer her. Eventually she answered her student's last question as a teacher.
ただの確率だよ。カブトヤマニトリ。
なんですって。
特に成長期の HMI がハローを制御しきれない場合、つまり精神的肉体的に不安定な状況に陥るとオンスロート化する可能性は高くなる。だがそうでなくともオンスロート症は発症する。多くは確率的なものだ。少なくとも現在の研究では遺伝その他の要因は発見できていない。
そうですの。
There was no reason for misfortune. Misfortune was a reason. With a reason was a result of an unfortunate progression. Failure, basically. That was just an accident. This was just an accident. She would die because of the equivalent of a rock someone had thrown into a crowd that merely happened to hit her. It was a very simple answer. For Katadias, I don't know how to fucking pronounce that, opened their upper sections and revealed the machine
で
guns.
は、さらばだ。
Mitri felt that this was a somewhat decent ending. In a way, she was grateful to Tokino for not making excuses for taking her life. This let her die without forgiving her executioner.
どこへ行きたい？
The whisper echoing in her head as though wrapping around her made a mess of the heart that had accepted it all. She finally realized why there was a part of her that resisted this.
わけない。
She could understand that she had to die. This rejection of reality was more simple than that.
成田さんにあの人にせめてもう一度。どこへ行きたい？私は。
Four machine guns fired, but bullets that could rip humans to shreds were scattered around the room, completely tearing it apart. At the same time, 3 of the concierges were cut horizontally and slid apart. Tokino had realized her failure. She should have disposed of Mitri without spending any time talking to her. No, she was late from the start. Mitri had stopped being human long ago. The Academy had lost the battle against her the moment they failed to kill her on the night of the ball. Thus, what had happened here wasn't a mistake, but a mere continuation of the final act that had begun that night. I actually wanted to cry. The last Karcharias was cut in 4 and
それ
stopped.
では時の先生、今度は私がそちらに参りますから、少しだけお待ちください。
In the room devoid of people, Mitri cracked a gleeful smile. Oh no. The calamity was coming. The attention of the prefectural police was more akin to fear. They were all positioned on the southern side of the large bridge over Tenkawa. The barricade of black and white patrol cars and transport cars would be useless against what was coming. They had no choice but to cling to whatever they had. It had come. The calamity that appeared had a human appearance. It was the girl once called Mitri Kaputuyama, and the dangers he presented was unprecedented.
県警の警備部隊を撤退させてください。
From within a mobile base disguised as a trailer, Tokuno Yomise spoke with as calm a voice as she could.
我々には警察としての職務がある。
The officers were indeed skilled and brave. They stood before the calamity, despite knowing it was futile. For they were aware of the that the Yotsu Bridge was the last line of defense against the coming calamity. At the expense of their hard work and the 7 Karcharias Tokino had, they had successfully led the target here.
これ以上の交戦には意味がありません。対象は対人に極めて強力な機能を有します。生身の人間を投入したところで奴に武器を与えるだけに終わるでしょう。
It's really annoying.
つまり足手まといだというのだな。
対象を誘導できたのは警備部の尽力があればこそです。
The Director General wasn't incompetent. He'd handled many HMI problems, so he had what it took to listen to the opinions of an expert like Tokino. The officers quickly retreated, leaving behind only the barricades. Mitri walked to the barricade as if it was a desolate wasteland. She couldn't be called human anymore. She was a case of onslaught syndrome, the worst thing that HMIs could become.
もう勝ったような顔だな。自分を邪魔できる者はいないと言いたいのか。
The sight of Mitri on the monitor made Tokino squint a little, then restore the mask of a calculating commander. The odds were completely against Tokino. It was the Academy's practice to dispose of those with onslaught syndrome before they became the calamities they were. And Tokino had killed many HMIs so far. But now, Tokino knew the powers and abilities of the crowns better than they themselves did. She was the one who told them to be the forefront of the future. She was now giving her all to kill Mitri with her own hands. Whoops. The purity of onslaught syndrome patients grew as more time passed by after the onset of the disease, which also increased the danger of the rogue phenomena caused. So far, only 3 complete cases have been recorded, because disposing of them before could happen. Because disposing of them before that could happen was the only way to deal with them. Mitri Kaputuyama had stood against her disease for many days since the onset, and that only made it more pure. You have to consider her the 4th. Mitri's Tempest 7 had an area of only 5 meters. She could bunch up her threads to reach as far as almost a kilometer away. Tokino was on the south bank, but she was already within Mitori's range. Mitori had this power, even as a normal HMI. Just how great could it be now that she had transformed? It would surely be beyond all measure. However, Tokino wouldn't back away from here. It wasn't because of some illogical reason, such as taking responsibility for what had happened, but to increase the chances of victory, no matter how little her presence helped. The ones to deal with such uncertain situations first should be the ones who were closest and knew the most about it.
来い。まだ手が尽きてはいないぞ。
Mitri was walking with grace in her steps. That was about a kilometer between the north and south banks. Where in this place could her dear teacher
時
be?
の先生、逃げたりはなさりませんわよね。 どこに隠れていても構いませんわ。時間をかけて探しましょう。さあ、何も心配はいりません。私が守って差し上げます。
Mitri was already in the middle of the bridge. As every second began to feel like an eternity, Tokino saw something unexpected. Daybreak was just around the corner. On the windy bridge, the calamity stopped her march. The overwhelming conqueror had slowed down for no one. Had suddenly stopped, as if she remembered something important. A voice filled with joy escaped her lips. Within her enchanted gaze, at the southern bank, there was a silhouette.
待たせてしまったようだが、約束を果たそう。
He was standing at the entrance of the Yotsuo Bridge. The dark-clad woman smiled like a flower bloomed. It was as though she was saying, "You really are late."
成田真理だと。
ようやく戻ってきてみれば、このありさまとはな。貴様がしでかしたのか。夜店時の。
Narita was standing next to the disguised container and sat there with a cold voice while looking straight at it, as though he knew that Tokino was inside.
ここから先は私の舞台だ。これ以上余計な手出しをせず、引っ込んでいろ。
なんだと。お前はどんな愚か者だ。オンスロート相手に生身で単身で一体何ができる。
さあ、参りますわ。
The girl spread her fan. The wind blew through the night, made the world decay, bringing with it death and a reek reminiscent of overripe fruit. The wind tore my cheeks, shoulder, side, back, arms, legs. My entire body was cut by blades even thinner than silk threads, making me bleed all over. It was done by the threads of Mitori's personal area, let loose like spider silk upon the wind. They cut bodies by making the places they touched commit apoptosis. They had the potential to take complete control over the flesh of others. There was more, however. Something silently fell from above. Followed by a sound that reached the horizon, the bridge as a whole shook. Part of the steel frame supporting the bridge had been cut off and fell. The area was cut. That was cut was as smooth as a mirror, still parted by an intense laser. An invisible blade that reached kilometers away and could cut anything. As she was now, Mitori could destroy and send Lokishima in less than half a day. There were 500 meters between us. I'd slipped through her invisible blades during choreography, and with no cover in sight, that was simply impossible. Rather, it would have been if that was the same as before. There was no hesitation. I had no choice, so I merely went forward, all to fulfill my promise and accomplish what I had to. Focused my mind going deeper into myself than I ever had. Shindiri Narita was close to death. After coming back from death 7 years ago, I'd noticed my power. However, that was a mistake right from the start. A misapprehension of what Shindiri Narita was. Hamlet 12. A halo of curse and revenge. Revenge was part of Shindiri Narita, but that alone didn't define me.
Set.
I initiated the boost code. The halo was the manifestation of an HMI's nature, the possibility within. Know thyself. Hamlet 12 was an incomplete halo that could only be used through a voice. Inputting code into the target's mind as suppressing it was only a fragment, a branch of its true power. During the battle, to protect Mitori from the gunship, I'd become aware of death and caught a glimpse of it for the very first time. As it passed, the deeper death went beyond the Golden Tower and the Eternal Wasteland. Encountered the true face of Onslaught Syndrome, an entity you could call the Halo itself. That let me see what Shindiri Narita truly was.
There are more things in heaven and...
I will never mistake myself again. I pictured the endless wasteland. I placed the original primordial me sleeping within over the me that I was now. The disparity was nigh impossible to close, but I brought it as close to but I brought it close to zero as though tuning channels.
Type Hamlet 12. Run!
I extended my right hand. Mitori swung her fan. The threads danced all around. First, the deadly threads were akin to light, snow, and beauty. But one couldn't forget that this charm was like that of absolute zero, which gave death to all and everything. From 4, 8, 32 directions, they silently floated and created a vortex that approached me. Not even water could leak out of there. Escaping, or even evading it, was physically impossible. It was a deadly cage that was thoroughly unavoidable. Mitori closed her fan. The threads closed in on me like a bag being shut. But this wasn't the end. I'd broken out of the prison Mitori was sure was inescapable and dashed forward. She wouldn't know how I'd avoid the completely unescapable attack. Going just a short distance forward made my breathing ragged. The bane burned in my brain made my vision blur. I used the breathing of Geb to harmonize my body and mind and body again. The headache didn't vanish, but it was understandable. The load was too great. My brain circuitry was fried, but I continued doing the needed calculations. I was using what I'd found beyond my possibilities while facing death. This was the true form of the halo they called Hamlet 12. The trump card was right here. It cleared my consciousness and focused my mind whole. I would wring my brain for what it was worth and make it to Mitori. Mitori swung her fan 3 more times, still maintaining her grace, reminiscent of a white heron. Mitori knew. Even with her heart lost, her body remembered and was aware that Narita had come to defeat her. She knew, even if she didn't know my methods, she remembered how I'd lured her back in the forest once. Thus, she knew that it was Shinri Narita's right arm that was making this impossibility possible. Oh, lovely!
We are such types.
The woman who had swept away all resistance with a single finger couldn't tolerate the man who had escaped her death trap. She didn't hold back at all. She attacked the 3rd, 4th, 5th time, creating waves of invisible threads that became tsunamis. I withered them all up to and including the 5th. My right hand moved like lightning, bringing down all the threads that nobody should even see. It shouldn't have been possible. It should have been impossible to predict where the invisible threads would come from and bring them down, even by reading Mitori's eye movements and unconscious gestures of her body. However, the all-embracing smile she had on warped for the first time. She was feeling indignation. With anger-like emotion, she glared at the prey that was surviving the inescapable reign of death. I'd already brought down the 7th wave of threads while rushing to her like a comet in the dawn sky. Mitori was only a bit over 50 meters away. I was far from unharmed. It was impossible to wade all of her attacks. The wounds on me were countless, but all of them were too shallow to be fatal. That was enough, good enough for me. The sudden explosive sound was far too familiar. The metal sky demon had descended from right below the bridge. It was the gunship. The bleeding edge system installed on the UH-1 had appeared to resume the battle against the prey that once let go. It must have used the darkness to silently approach the bridge while basically gliding on the surface of Tenkava. The gunship didn't rise high. It positioned itself right above the bridge, almost directly above Mitri and I. The weapon system began turning. Heavy weaponry that had almost killed us several times now consisted of chain guns, 2 anti-ground rocket pods, and 4 anti-ground missiles. If traffic stopped by checkpoints, it was impossible that civilians would wander on the bridge. This was a part of a city, so the use of such firepower could still create casualties. In a way, that was a show of how serious the Academy was about this. All who suffer from onslaught syndrome must die. It just pisses off. Mitri swung her fan at the gunship. The Raptor predicted the move and descended on her at even greater speed. Mitri used threads that consumed reality as a shield to easily do away with the chain gun and use it to shoot down the coming missiles. However, her defense wasn't absolute. When she was an HMI anyway. Like a Glock used to keep someone in place, this would leave a slight opening. It was a question if Mitri could withstand all the firepower. The Metal Raptor went on the trajectory to ram itself at her while simultaneously focusing all its ammo on her alone. The turret spun and locked on her. Time seemed to slow down as they began to fire. Contrary to my guess, the chain guns aimed at neither me nor Mitri. They shot down the missiles coming right at its side with unbelievable precision.
まったく、成田様はいつまで経っても手間のかかるご主人様でございます。
Below the newly replaced maid clothing, she was so covered in bandages you would assume she was a mummy, and it was a question if she could even walk. However, she wouldn't be a maid of the Narita household if she'd left the stage without using the goods we'd ordered, which made it in the nick of time.
それでは、ご奉仕させていただきます。
The cylindrical object on my mate's shoulder released fire and a missile. Cordelia had accounted for the possibility of Hisha attacking the gunship. The computer had already experienced it and it shot the missiles down with precision no human could ever achieve. A flower of fire bloomed in the sky. Was Hisha's attack in vain? No, the explosion came with reflective snow-like bits that spread in the air. Chaff counted as aluminium foil and plastic pieces that briefly disrupted radar activity and communications. As an object remote controlled by Cordelia, the gunship was as good as blinded.
では、成田様、あとはちゃっちゃーっとやっちゃってください。
やはり君は完璧なメイドだな。
I knew full well that it was my turn.
この気を逃すな。
Ran up the vertical steel frame supporting the bridge. Even if the gunship couldn't see, some of other senses noticed me as the chain gun was trying to mow me down. Using the bridge structure as a shield, I ran until I was high enough, then jumped. I would love for the speed lines to be gone, so I could actually use this potentially. Turning myself to a bullet, I flew through the air and clung to the skid of the low-flying gunship. My hand slipped, and thought I was so fatigued. This made me fall. It was dozens of meters in the sky. Even if I landed under the water, the impact wouldn't be any different from that of hitting concrete. Couldn't even land properly from this position. Falling would mean certain death. Exposed to the downward airflow and pressure of the spinning wings, I put strength into my legs and used the armaments equipped to climb up the units. I was holding onto the upper back. If I wanted to bring the gunship down, I had to aim for the wing control system. Focus my halo into my right hand. Found the machine's equivalent of a nervous system and threw my palm at it. The gunship began to act as though intoxicated. I clung to it like it was a wild horse. Being thrown off would still mean death. The steel beams of the bridge were drawing close. Though the gunship's main body evaded them, it flew into the supporting cables like a fly going straight into a spider's webs. The vehicle was being crushed and its wings were scattered. That was the extent of the damage. However, since it was no longer moving, the gunship was torn in 7. Mitori's relentless threads cut it up, and the metal raptor met in silent anticlimactic end. Remains scattered in the air. I used them as stepping stones to return to the bridge's steel support structure. I lowered my kinetic energy by spiraling down the support pillar I put my right hand on. Not resisting the inertia, I went down and upon landing, rolled a few times to disperse the impact. When I finally stood up, Mitori Kabutoyama was right in front of me. A moment of absolute stillness followed by the screeching of metal and the roar of the explosives. The gunship's 7 pieces fell, its fuel lit up, creating an intense crimson explosion on the bridge. All of it acted like a giant hammer strike that sent a shockwave and a gale of heat towards me. Mitori. She smiled and talked in a clear, gentle tone as if she was herself again. It was a small, brief miracle that made me feel like time had been turned back. Right after I said that, the miracle expired as if it was a goodbye. Once again, I was facing her remains, the onslaught syndrome manifest. I would choose to believe that this was a glimpse of the past, that this glimpse of the past was no accident. That it was a miracle created by Soul wishing to keep the promise even after she had lost everything. The explosions and crimson flames behind were like a clear accompaniment to the music. I extended my right hand to her, like I had on that ball. As expected, Mitori responded. There was so little soul and heart in that sentence that it was actually sad. Like I was listening to a recording of what Mitori used to be. Another explosion. With that as the signal, we each made our move. Took a slow step, dancing a waltz. Mitori Kabutoyama's area was right in front of me. Vented would bind me with all her threads. It was a world with no blood or flesh. An area where only the will could still function. The Clockwork Republic. To protect everything, she would put it all under her wing. It was a world of absolute control, built by nothing but love. However, it couldn't reach Shinri Narita. I used my right hand to tear away the countless threads trying to bind me. There was no meaning in that, of course. Threads were manifestations of a personal area, and no weapon could break reality itself. However, the threads I brought down all stopped in midair as though pinned to where they were like pressed flowers. I repeated the deed as many times as I had to. A bunch of threads in the air were akin to frozen lightning. As I bound them all, I drew closer and closer to Mitori. The expression warped. The emotion displayed was hard for a human to understand. But if there was a word for it, it would be panic. More threads appeared, showing her determination to pierce the enemy. That changed nothing. I merely stopped them again. Absolute stillness. The true form of the power called Hamlet 12. Up until now, I'd only used it to send out internalized code using my voice as the intermediary. The nature of Shinri Narita's halo was to make sure everything stands still. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. I understand what his onslaught would likely look like. He would just the world everything. I had to be more precise. It didn't induce stillness, but prevent any change. Funny for the guy who keeps saying that there's like, do not fear change. irony. I tore off a moment in time and created eternity by rejecting all change. It was a halo that made things eternally still. Eternity could not exist in this world. Change was an inevitability. Everything changed at the quantum level. To deny that was to make all that was expire. A lack of change would create a world where only the past continued forever. This insane nature truly fitted Avenger driven mad by a hatred from the past.
Henkaを恐れるなというこの自分自身が誰よりも変化を拒絶して復讐のために帰ってきた。滑稽とは思わないかね。
いいえ、きっとそれも素晴らしいこと。私も死ぬのは怖くないと思いながら死んでしまうのが怖かった。でもきっとみんなそう。ほどけない結び目のようなこの世界と同じで。
矛盾を抱えていく。
あなたも私も他の誰であろうと。
This waltz that felt eternal despite lasting just a few seconds now drew to a close. Brought down the final wave of threads. Mitri was now within arm's reach. Couldn't save Mitri with this power of mine, so there was only one thing left to do.
愛しています。
知っているよ。
Took her hand as if to dance with her, then touched her heart and nape, calf, spinal cord. Had to cut away her central nervous system and numbed her to pain. Then I used my halo on her heart. Snap. The dancing princess collapsed as silently as a plucked flower. Like Yomi's is just still gonna be like on the sidelines like, what the fuck did I just experience? My tension abated, warping my vision. Fell to my knees right next to Mitri's immobile body. My heart was raging, my nerves were overloaded, and my brain was writhing as if it split into 5 pieces. It was the price of overusing my halo. My body was injured all over too. But the wounds were all minor. The combined blood loss almost made me faint. I tried to harmonize my body and mind using the breathing of Geb, but my overused frame could only recover slowly. Ishia would come here soon. I felt bad about it, but I had to borrow her help.
私にはなすべきことがある。だが、その前に君を弔おう。
I reached for Mitri's pale cheek, then froze in place. Someone was putting a gun against the back of my head.
まさかオンスロートを生身で倒すとはな。貴様の化け物ぶりもここまで来れば称賛者だよ。とはいえ、さすがに疲れ果てたか。無防備に私を近づけるとは。
夜店時の。
この状況では、ハムレット12の干渉力でも私の行動は阻止できまい。もちろん、その体でハローの演算ができるとして、だがな。成田真理、いや帝春水、貴様は価値ある人材だ。現状唯一の男性とはある。7年前死にながら生き延びたほどの生命力、そしてオンスロートからのサバイバ
ー。To the academy, so the academy had already realized who I was.
スクールに戻れ。復讐という愚行ではなく、人類の未来のためにその力を振るえ。
己の意志ではなく、システムの与えた抱きすべきコピーをまき散らすだけの愚か者。 貴様のざれ言を聞いてやるほど私は暇ではない。
そうか。一応残念と言っておこう。正直に言ってお前はイレギュラーすぎる。システムそのものの重大な瑕疵になりかねない。ここで処理できるのは幸いだ。
She declared that she would execute me.
夜店時の7年前、裏切りを囁いた魔女。私は復讐の憎悪だけを抱いて戻ってきた。
試してみろ。その体で銃弾より早く動けるものなら。
A gunshot resounded.
何？
Tokino's Yumisa's hand went up like it was a spring action, and she fired into the sky. By the time she aimed her gun at me again, my right hand touched her forehead.
貴様は無残に殺す。苦しみ抜いて地獄へ行け。
これは
私の痛みの一部だ。もともと私の力は人格や記憶への干渉に長けていた。だから私の中にある痛みの記憶をお前に送り込んで固定してみた。
They were the memories of pain I'd accumulated over the past 7 years. They'd become an eternal hellish torch that it would never vanish or weaken, violating her entire nervous system until the moment she would die.
まさか貴様が、貴様のハローは不変。こんな力はありえない。しかしこれは
私の力を気づかせてくれたのはお前とミトリだ。もとより私は死の淵でハローに目覚めた。私にとって死こそ最も近しいものだった。
不変。演歌を否定した先に待つのはただの死だ。貴様の力は過去しか見ない。死しかもたらさない。愚か極まりないハローだ。
そうだ。成田真理は愚か極まりない復讐者。
だが、そうか。貴様が5人目か。人類の可能性が、それがこんな復讐など無意味な真似を。
復讐に意味など必要ない。私はただ
She just said the fifth.
己の意志を最後まで遂げるだろう。
Oh no, he's entering onslaught, isn't he? The woman collapsed without so much as a squeak and writhed on the ground like a fish out of water. She wasn't worth any of my attention now.
君にまた助けられたな。
I held Mitori up and she slightly opened her eyes.
最後だというのに、敵のあなたを助けてしまいましたわ。私としたことが。
Like, he really is fucked though. Like, they're just a bunch of small cuts. But still, like, we know that her... Actually, does that count still? Who knows, really? Her grave, wax-like skin was losing heat with every passing moment. There was nothing that could be done now. I didn't know if that was because she was dying or caused by the shock of almost dying, but Mitori was herself again, if only for this moment.
どこまでも運命とは残酷だ。
She wouldn't have had to suffer if she died without knowing anything. The world didn't show her any love even in the bitter end. I'd witnessed countless deaths in my life. I should have been just another one to add to the list. But somehow it made my chest heat up and my voice almost shiver.
こうして、このまま、ありのままで、いけることの。
Like, this is not a CG that I should be using as a thumbnail, but it's better than, like, ah yes, jump for the heli! Despite the situation, she smiled in a way reminiscent of a saint who could forgive any sins.
それでいいのかね。
悔しいです。 本当は悔しくて悲しくて、でも私は最後にあなたに会えました。
そうか。
The will of the heavens was beyond measure. Cruelties and inevitabilities were beyond us all. People only lived as they were, to the best of their abilities. That was all there was to it.
それでも君を失うことは悲しい。
Mitri was able to smile at the end, so as I hold myself against the emotions surging within.
輝ける時はきっと。
Oops, that was why people tried to make the most of their lives.
私は成田真理のあり方に反逆し続けよう。
Eternity was unreachable to men. It could only shine in the distance, just like the rainbow of that day. It was exactly why the time slipping away was both precious and sad. The clipping of a single moment was like an object prickled in formalin, completely meaningless. Shinri Narita wouldn't fear change, even if it was my nature to be attracted to the eternity that had burnt to ash.
君は最後まで這うようにして歩き続けた。だから私もきっと歩みを止めない。
信じていますから。
The final farewell was close. Mitori's eyes were losing focus.
可能性はあるかもしれない。ミトリ、もう少しあがいてみるつもりはあるかね。無理強いはしない。この苦しみを、この煉獄を果てしなく歩いていく。その苦役を、決して報われないかもしれない歩みを。
何？
Her voice was becoming weaker, as frail as glasswork. What I was about to do probably couldn't even be called a possibility. I didn't even know if it would work.
最後までやり遂げようという意地だけなのかもしれない。
言ってください。
ミトリ、君のハローで肉体の機能を止めたまえ。仮死状態になった君を私が永遠にとどめよう。しかし永遠なるは本来この変わりゆく世界にはありえないもの。ひとたびとどめたものはこの世のものではなくなる。解除したところで以前と同じではいられない。
それでは
Indeed, it was meaningless. Narita's power couldn't save Mitri Kaputuyama.
君の力があれば違うかもしれない。すでに終わったものをとどめるのであれば、それができるのなら、今日君を救う手段はなくても明日には違うかもしれない。もっと先には別の可能性が芽生えているかもしれない。昨日を愛するためではなく、明日を夢見るためにこの力を使えるなら、これは分の悪い賭けだ。今の君が自身を無事制御できるか、私がどこまでとどめ続けられるのか、全てが賭けだ。あるかどうかもわからない可能性にかけろということだ。仮に全てがうまくいったとしても、未来に変わりなく蘇生できるかもわからない。苦しみを伸ばすだけかもしれない。愚か者。
The detestable voice of reason reached me, wrung out through pain that no normal human could bear.
死に損なっているのか。
貴様は過去に溺れている昨日しか愛せない男が明日を語ろうとは身の程を知れ。私が死んで誰が治療法を見出せる。お前は復讐で過去で。
米国のジョン・ダーウィン、 ドイツのウォルフラム・フランケンシュタイン、インドのアリア・バータ・サーカー、日本のグランドプロフェッサー。お前と同等の賢者は他にも4人いる。彼らの誰かに真理へ至ってもらうとしよう。
彼らがお前に力を貸すと笑えるな。貴様の素性はシステムも知った。帝、純粋。貴様に逃げ場はない。
追い詰められたネズミのように逃げ惑うのはお前たちだ。お前が黒船に力を貸し、帝を皆殺しにしたお前たちの意志が帝を滅ぼしたならば、成田真理が復讐を果たす。
システムに歯向かう気か。貴様は狂っている。獅子とありにもならない。
Oh, fuck you.
さらばだ。夜店時の罪には罰を。
Stood with shaking legs and aimed the familiar Luger, my also one arm at Tokino. This was the gun that I wouldn't use for anything but revenge, carrying the prayers of the past 7 years. A single gunshot resounded through the night sky. Tokino stopped moving for good. The deafening silence surrounded us. A deafening silence surrounded us. Mitori's hand held mine.
あなたを信じます。
So, we began walking a very long path. Time passes. If you walked around by yourself, you could occasionally encounter strange things. Once, on a certain summer, there was a man found dead at the edge of town. The cause of death was organ destruction by 2 bullets. It was obviously a murder, but that alone didn't make it all that special. According to the statistics from some days ago, 200,000 people died every day, which was 1.7 every second. Whether they were conscious or not, people could die in a single second if they didn't properly protect themselves. If there was something that made this incident stand out, was the fact that the man who died was an HMI, a human with special powers. Because of that, or otherwise, it held meaning to certain people. What a tragedy. That was the best way to describe it. The man laying face up on the pavement was clearly dead. That meant that half a day spent getting there by plane and by car had become a waste within just 2 hours after arrival. Point-blank shot at the heart and stomach. The amount of skill involved made it clear that this was the work of a pro. The body was still warm, meaning that the murder was close. The start was just awful, but there was still something to gain here. The precious witness was already in no state to be useful. Going back empty-handed wasn't an option. The nose twitched. The smell of gunpowder had moved above. The murderer climbed up this basic back alley wall like a spider. After a bit of jumping from wall to wall to reach the top, the culprit became visible, running away while jumping from rooftop to rooftop. He was called for a chase, and the distance was closed in no time. His legs could complete with Thompson's gazelles and speed, so merely trying to run away was far from enough. It seemed like the culprit was done for, but they dodged the moment the chase came near. The culprit had sensed the danger and went to the ground while picking out a handgun. Not bad, but that was the end. Before the culprit could pull the trigger, the gun was sent flying by the hit from just a nail.
てめえ、おとなしくしやがれ。抵抗したら腕の一本ぐらい。って、あれ？もしかして皮脂やか？
これは赤人様。お久しぶりでございます。
Isha let go of the M11 that but she almost took out of her skirt and gave an excessively courteous maid greeting. Tamo Wakahito and Hishiamori had met up a few times since Tamo had been acting as a student. Hishia was the maid of a certain scumbag, and Tamo had spent a long time seriously believing that it was customary for maids to have AA missiles under their skirts.
もしかして今はこの教会に住んでんのかよ。いつも似たようなところにいるな。
ハードボイルドに教会はつきものですので。それにしてもお久しぶりでございます、赤人様。
様はやめてくれって前にも言ったろ。半年、それとも1年ぶりか。ヒシアは全然変わらないな。
This line of work, people who lived a long time were few. Whether they were friends or enemies, meeting a familiar face always made Tamo feel like she'd returned to her homeland.
赤人様は髪をお切りになったのですね。
ああ、うん。まあ、イメチェンってやつ。たまにはこういうのもいいかなって。それよりも、何やらかしてくれやがったんだよ。ヒシアがやっちまったやつ、探すの苦労したんだぞ。
If Tama was any younger, she would have had Hishia pay for this without even listening to her, but she was an adult now. Hishia wasn't some lunatic who killed for no reason, so Tama would decide what to do after hearing what she had to say.
お答えする前にお伺いしますが、赤人様が今回来られたのは、例の脳がない脳事件についてでしょうか。
Tamo said nothing, for Hishia was completely right, even if the name she gave for it what seemed weird. The man Hishia had killed was the only lead to the truth behind the incident Tamo was investigating. Tamo's jobs generally involved killing, but there was the occasional simple job. One had to be flexible with their trade.
少し場所を変えましょうか。
And so, the two strange guests arrived at a small graveyard behind the old church. One was a maid who always behaved in a graceful manner, while the other was a girl with short hair and teen-like clothing that suited her healthy body. Hidden at the edge of the graveyard, there was a gravestone that looked far too plain to represent those whose name were written on it, to people who had led lives far detached from plain. Shinri Narita, Mitri Kapatoyama. A few people who visited this place knew the true meaning of these names.
こんなの作ってたんだ。
赤人様にもぜひ見ていただきたかったのです。
Not saying anything, Tamo squinted a bit. She was likely looking back at the distant past. The past was eternal, but it couldn't only be pondered and never regained. But it couldn't only be pondered and never regained for the But it could only be pondered and never gained for the world continuing to move forward. I feel like it could only be pondered.
赤人様
Her shoulders were shaking, and she wasn't responding. She must have reached her limit.
ああ、もう相変わらずバカが治ってねえな、あの野郎は。ったく、縁起でもねえっつうの。
A loud voice made the birds gathered on the nearby branches disperse.
どうして墓なんだよ。成田のやつはまだピンピンしてんだろ。
相変わらず極つぶしで大きな乳には目がなくもみまくりんぐのご主人様でございます。先日ご主人様が生前に墓に入っておくというよくわからないジャパンの風習を聞いてこられまして、では早速と最高級の御影石で、このようなイベントぜひ関係者各位赤人様にもご覧いただいて爆笑していただかなければとヒシア思い立った次第です。
確かにあるけどその風習。でもさ、そういやミトリはまだまだか。
Indeed, some time had passed since then, but the promise hadn't been fulfilled yet. On the final day, she needed Narita.
それと実は脳がない脳事件を企てていた連中は半月ほど前ご主人様がちゃちゃっと片付けてしまわれました。
On the final day, she needed Narita. Shut up, Pishi! I'm trying to read here! On the final day, she needed Narita had preserved Mitori Kapatoyama, and she was now living in eternity. There we go. Now we can talk.
それと実は脳がない脳事件を企てていた連中は半月ほど前
ご主人様がちゃちゃっと片付けてしまわれました。背景込み入ってますので。は
あ？何それ？俺は事件の首謀者の手がかりを追って、死んだあの男がその…
奴めは一味の生き残りでございます。ご主人様が片付け損ねたゴミを、できたメイドがお片付けしました。
じゃあ何か、結局、ここまで無駄足かよ。人の仕事邪魔しやがって、直接文句言ってやら！
ご主人様でしたら、今頃南方でございます。脳がない脳の犯人どものおかげで、アリアバータ・サーカー教授の所在がつかめました。今度こそ、という意気込みで。
南方つうと、あの辺りか。割と近いな。
赤人様、ご主人様を NTR に行かれるとかですか？
んなこと冗談でも言うな！俺は別にあいつのタッチでも味方でもないし、いっそさっさと死んでくれた方が世界的に平和だとか思ってるし。でも、まあ、ミトリは今でも俺の友達だから、ことのついでに邪魔しやがった野郎を一発ぶん殴るぐらいはしてきてやるかな。
With a what a pain, and not even a goodbye, Tomo gallantly turned around, quickly disappeared out of sight.
赤人様も義理がたい方ですね。
Indeed, she hadn't changed at all. Tomo was very direct, and it was one of the things that made me love her. As for what I was, not even I knew that, in fact. Was I the soul of the sleeping Mitori-Route, an echo of the onslaught syndrome within? Or maybe I was the part that he had preserved using his halo, making me wander around all alone. It didn't matter much. I got to see my friendly face I hadn't seen in a long time, which was quite pleasant. She was living in a different time frame than I, and she was even more vigorous and beautiful than before. Drifting through the halted time, I continued to sleep, hoping that I would awaken one day. I was sure that this part of me would disappear once I woke up. That was not a problem. We were creatures that moved forward. The future was destruction at the end. Nothing could stop it. As a stagnant being, I had to be a dream that vanished with the awakening. Meeting a nostalgic face made me look back into the past. Even in the end, I wasn't able to stop being Mitori-Route. I couldn't allow myself the weakness of showing him my tears. If I'd cried, he might have wept as well. Perhaps he could have recovered this thing he'd lost long ago. And I was now regretting that I couldn't give it to him. If he'd regained his tears, perhaps he could have looked back at those painful days that had passed with a nostalgic smile on his face. Once, and if the promise was eventually fulfilled, he would begin anew. Although time had passed again, no, time meant little to me. One morning ahead of it, I heard a voice, called out my name from a distance. Memories of that day came flooding back. Saw light in the horizon. The voice was still speaking. Felt like I could go there now. There was probably lots of pain waiting for me. It was fine with me. Surprises were what made life worth a living. This rest was now over. I said my goodbye to this sunny dream. I was slightly reluctant to part with it, but goodbyes were exactly what made things precious. So I stood tall on my toes and jumped into the light. Give me a CG to use, please. Come on, give me a CG I can use. Don't just like cut it here. Give me a CG to use for the thumbnail. Journey to tomorrow, you motherfucking bastard. Listen, all I wanted was a CG. All I wanted was a thumbnail. By the way, that's where hers are. Lovely! Again. Like, what the fuck am I supposed to use now? I can't really use either of these, since, you know, spoilers! Like, it's nice that you gave these characters, like, fucking routes and all that, but... the fuck CG am I supposed to use? Can't really use this. It's not really topical. And using either of these is just massive fucking spoilers. The only one I really have left is this one. But that one didn't show up, so I can't use that one. This one didn't show up either? I ought to use this one for the second time now. Do I really have to use this one? Possibly. This is bad! Also, I'm gonna call this part 2 Your Eternity. Isn't that like a fucking show? Hold on. Oh yeah, I was slightly spammed. Oh yeah, it is an anime that recently aired even. Perfect name. Fuck it, I'm just like... I guess I basically have to use that one. Ah! I've like whipped my finger against like the hard plastic on my chair. Like proper whipping motion. Ah! Anyways, so yeah. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. See you next time. Bye bye. It's not really nice to like this music. Honestly, I really ought to like just get the OST for this game. This game has a really good OST. Anyways, bye bye.